The phone rang at 6:47 a.m., jolting me awake from the deepest sleep I'd had in months. Training had been brutal lately, and my body desperately needed every minute of rest it could get. But when I saw my coach's name flashing on the screen, my heart immediately started racing. Coach Rodriguez never called this early unless something was seriously wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire, you need to get to the pool immediately. His voice was tight with urgency. There's been an incident, and we need to talk before the news gets out. I threw on my tracksuit and drove through the empty streets of Riverside, my mind spinning with possibilities. Had someone been hurt? Was there a problem with the facility? As I pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Community Aquatic Center, I noticed several cars already there, including what looked like a news van parked discreetly across the street. Coach Rodriguez met me at the entrance, his usually calm demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before, a mixture of anger and protective concern that made my stomach drop. In his hands was a printout of what appeared to be an online article, and even from a distance, I could see my name in the headline. "Your Aunt Linda gave an interview to the Denver Sports Tribune yesterday," he said, his voice barely controlled. "She told them that your recent qualifying times were suspicious, that someone from a small town like Riverside couldn't possibly compete at the national level without some kind of assistance or enhancement. She suggested that your success was artificial, that you were an embarrassment to the family name, and that the swimming community should investigate your achievements." The words hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed the paper and read the devastating quotes attributed to Linda Peterson, my father's sister, the woman who had spent the last 4 years undermining every achievement, every milestone, every dream I'd worked toward. But this time, she hadn't just attacked me privately at family gatherings or whispered her poison to relatives. She had taken her campaign public, potentially destroying everything I'd sacrificed for. My journey to that devastating morning began 4 years earlier, when I was 18 and had just graduated from Riverside High School with a scholarship to Colorado State University. Most kids in our small mountain town of 8,000 people had predictable paths after graduation: work at the ski resort during winter, the lumber mill year-round, or if they were lucky, attend community college in the next town over. But I had different dreams, dreams that seemed impossibly large for someone from our quiet corner of Colorado. I wanted to swim in the Olympics. The dream itself wasn't new. I'd been swimming competitively since I was 8 years old, training at our modest community pool under the guidance of Coach Rodriguez, a former collegiate swimmer who had moved to Riverside to escape the pressure of big city athletics. He saw something in me that others missed, a combination of natural talent and relentless determination that he believed could take me beyond the mountain valleys that surrounded our town. My father, Mark Thompson, worked double shifts at the lumber mill to support my training. He drove me to meets across Colorado and Wyoming, sleeping in our old pickup truck to save money on hotel rooms, cheering from bleacher seats that often held more empty spaces than spectators. He never once complained about the cost of equipment, travel, or the coaching fees that stretched our budget to its limits. My grandmother Helen owned a small ranch on the outskirts of town, a property that had been in our family for 3 generations. She was the matriarch who held our scattered family together, hosting Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations in her sprawling farmhouse kitchen. Her support for my swimming career was unwavering, even when it meant selling off portions of her land to help fund my training expenses. But there was one voice in our family that consistently sang a different tune, one person who never missed an opportunity to express doubt, criticism, and outright hostility toward my athletic pursuit. Linda Peterson, my father's older sister, lived in Denver with her husband David and their son Tyler. She worked as an office manager for a mid-sized insurance company and considered herself the sophisticated worldly member of the Thompson family. Linda had moved to Denver immediately after high school, married young, and spent the following decades looking down on those of us who had remained in Riverside. She viewed our small town as backwards and limiting, and she saw my swimming career as a naive fantasy that would inevitably end in disappointment and wasted resources. The first time I qualified for a state championship meet, Linda attended the family celebration at grandmother Helen's ranch. While everyone else congratulated me and expressed excitement about the upcoming competition, Linda pulled me aside near the barn where no one else could hear. "Claire, sweetheart, I think it's wonderful that you enjoy swimming as a hobby," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But you need to be realistic about your future. Girls from places like Riverside don't make it to the big leagues. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak, and worse, you're allowing your father to bankrupt himself chasing an impossible dream. I was 18 and still believed that hard work and dedication could overcome any obstacle, so I brushed off her comments as the opinions of someone who simply didn't understand the sport or my level of commitment. But Linda wasn't finished. Over the following months, her comments became more frequent and more pointed. At Tyler's high school graduation party, she made sure to mention loudly that her son was taking a practical approach to his future by studying business administration, unlike some family members who were pursuing unrealistic fantasies. When I qualified for my first national competition, she questioned whether the qualifying standards had been lowered to be more inclusive, suggesting that my achievement was somehow less legitimate than those of swimmers from established programs. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner at grandmother Helen's house. I had just returned from a national meet where I had placed 7th in my event, a result that qualified me for the Olympic trial. It was the culmination of years of training, sacrifice, and dreams, and my family was celebrating what felt like a miracle. Linda arrived late to dinner, making a grand entrance with expensive wine and gifts that seemed calculated to demonstrate her superior financial status. As we sat around the table sharing what we were grateful for, I mentioned my Olympic trials qualification and the opportunity it represented. "Oh, Claire," Linda interrupted, her voice cutting through the warm atmosphere like a blade. "I hate to be the voice of reason here, but someone needs to say it. You're 22 years old, training in a community pool in the middle of nowhere, with a coach who never made it beyond college swimming himself. Do you really think you belong in the same pool with athletes who have been training at elite facilities since they were children? You're going to embarrass yourself and embarrass this family." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face turned red with anger, but before he could speak, Linda continued her assault. "I've done some research on the swimmers who typically make Olympic teams. They come from families with resources. They train with world-class coaches. They have access to sports science and nutrition programs that cost more than most people make in a year. What you're doing isn't inspiring, it's delusional. And frankly, it's selfish to continue draining the family's resources for something that will never happen." Grandmother Helen's voice finally cut through the tension. "Linda, that's enough. This is a celebration, not a time for your negativity." But Linda wasn't finished. "I'm sorry if the truth is uncomfortable, but someone needs to protect Claire from herself. She's wasting the best years of her life chasing a fantasy instead of building a real career, a real future. What happens when she fails to make the team? What happens when reality sets in and she realizes she's spent years and thousands of dollars on nothing?" I excused myself from the table and walked out to the ranch's front porch, trying to process the venom in her words. My father followed me outside, his anger barely contained. "Don't listen to her, Claire," he said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "She's always been jealous of people who have the courage to chase their dreams. You belong at those trials, and you belong on that team." But Linda's words had planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger over the following months. Every time I had a bad practice, every time my times weren't improving as quickly as I hoped, I heard her voice questioning my abilities and my right to dream so big. The situation became even more complicated when Tyler, Linda's son, began attending Colorado State University the same year I transferred there to train with their elite swimming program. Tyler was a good kid who had been caught in the middle of his mother's hostility toward me, but he was also impressionable and often repeated her perspectives without realizing how hurtful they could be. During my sophomore year at Colorado State, I began training with a new coach who specialized in distance freestyle events. The training was more intense than anything I had experienced, requiring me to be in the pool twice a day while maintaining a full academic schedule. The physical and mental demands were enormous, but I was finally seeing the improvements in my times that indicated I might actually have a chance at making the Olympic team. Linda's response to my progress was to become even more vocal in her opposition. She began calling my father regularly, urging him to stop supporting my obsession and to encourage me to focus on more practical pursuits. She questioned the wisdom of the college scholarship I had received, suggesting that I was taking opportunities away from more deserving students. When I qualified for my first senior national championship, Linda's criticism reached a new level of cruelty. She suggested that the qualifying times had been manipulated or that I was receiving special treatment because of my background story. She implied that the swimming community was using me as a feel-good narrative rather than recognizing genuine talent. The most painful aspect of Linda's campaign against my dreams was the way it began to affect other family relationships. Some relatives who had initially supported my swimming career began to express doubts, influenced by her constant negativity and predictions of failure. Family gatherings became tense affairs where my achievements were downplayed and my goals were questioned. But perhaps the most devastating impact was on my own confidence. Despite my coach's encouragement and my improving performance, Linda's voice had become a constant presence in my head, questioning every success and predicting every failure. The girl who had once believed she could overcome any obstacle through hard work and determination was beginning to doubt whether she deserved to dream so big. The financial pressure was also mounting. Training at the elite level required expenses that stretched our family's resources to the breaking point. Equipment, travel, coaching fees, and competition entries cost thousands of dollars each year, money that came from my father's overtime hours, and my grandmother's willingness to mortgage portions of her ranch. Linda never missed an opportunity to point out these sacrifices, suggesting that my selfishness was destroying the family's financial stability for no good reason. She questioned whether it was fair for me to accept money from my grandmother, who was living on a fixed income, to fund what she considered a hopeless pursuit. During my junior year of college, I suffered a shoulder injury that required surgery and months of rehabilitation. The setback was devastating, not just because of the physical pain and lost training time, but because it seemed to confirm Linda's predictions about the futility of my dream. While my coaches and family expressed confidence that I would recover and return stronger than ever, Linda saw the injury as proof that I was pushing my body beyond its limits in pursuit of something that would never happen. This is what happens when you refuse to listen to reason.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She told my father during one of their phone conversations, not knowing that I was within earshot. Claire's body is telling her what I've been trying to tell her for years. She's not built for this level of competition. How many more injuries will it take before you stop enabling this fantasy? The recovery process was long and difficult, requiring not just physical rehabilitation, but a complete rebuilding of my confidence and tech. There were days when I wondered if Linda was right, if I was being stubborn and unrealistic about my chances of ever competing at the highest level. But Coach Rodriguez never wavered in his belief in my potential. He adjusted my training program to accommodate the injury recovery, worked with physical therapists to ensure my shoulder healed properly, and constantly reminded me that setbacks were a normal part of any athletic journey. His faith in my abilities became the foundation that supported me when my own confidence faltered. Slowly, over the course of my senior year, I began to return to form. My times in practice were improving, my shoulder felt strong, and for the first time in months, I began to believe again that my Olympic dreams were achievable. The trials were less than a year away, and I was finally swimming fast enough to believe I had a legitimate chance of making the team. But Linda's campaign against my dreams was far from over. As my senior year progressed and my performances improved, her criticism became more creative and more public. She began questioning my coach's methods, suggesting that small-town training couldn't possibly prepare someone for Olympic-level competition. She wondered aloud whether my times were accurate, given that they were often achieved in smaller, less competitive meets. The tension in our family reached a breaking point during my final Christmas break before the Olympic trial. At Grandmother Helen's annual Christmas Eve dinner, I announced that I had officially qualified for the trials in 3 events, and was ranked among the top 8 swimmers in the country in my primary event. Instead of celebration, Linda's response was swift and brutal. She suggested that the trials themselves were just another level of false hope, that making the team would require beating swimmers who had been training at elite facilities their entire lives. She questioned whether I understood the level of competition I would face, whether I was prepared for the inevitable disappointment of being eliminated in the preliminary round. "I just don't want to see you get your hopes up only to have them crushed on national television," she said, her voice filled with false concern. "It would be heartbreaking to watch you realize, in front of millions of people, that you were never really at this level." That Christmas Eve, as I lay in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my journey. I was going to prove Linda wrong, not for revenge or spite, but because I finally understood that her doubt was not about protecting me from disappointment. It was about her own fear of what it might mean if someone from our small town actually achieved something extraordinary. The Olympic trials were 6 months away, and I had never been more determined to show the world, and my family, exactly what a girl from Riverside, Colorado was capable of achieving. The 6 months leading up to the Olympic trials transformed my life in ways I never anticipated. What began as an intense training period became a psychological battleground, where every achievement was questioned and every setback was magnified by Linda's relentless campaign against my dream. Coach Rodriguez had designed a training program that pushed me beyond anything I had experienced before. I was in the pool at 5 in the morning for technique work, followed by weight training, then back in the water for afternoon distance sets that left me physically and mentally exhausted. The university had granted me a reduced course load to accommodate the training schedule, but I still maintained a full academic workload in exercise science, determined to have a backup plan despite my Olympic aspiration. My father had taken on additional shifts at the lumber mill to support the increased expenses that came with elite-level training. Equipment costs alone were staggering: high-tech suits for competition, specialized training gear, and regular equipment replacement as my training intensity increased. Travel expenses for qualifying meets stretched across multiple states, and each competition required entry fees, hotel accommodations, and meal expenses that added up to thousands of dollars monthly. Grandmother Helen had become my strongest financial supporter, quietly refinancing her ranch property to provide funds for my training and competition costs. She never mentioned the financial sacrifice, but I knew that at 78 years old, she was risking her retirement security to support my dreams. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, adding pressure to succeed that went far beyond personal ambition. Linda's response to my intensified training schedule was to increase her own campaign of doubt and criticism. She began calling my father twice weekly, no longer limiting her concerns to family conversations, but actively trying to sabotage my preparation by creating stress and uncertainty within our support system. During one particularly difficult phone call that I overheard, Linda questioned whether the physical demands of my training were healthy for a young woman. She suggested that the extreme conditioning might be causing long-term damage to my body, pointing to studies about female athletes and hormonal disruption. Her concerns sounded medical and well-researched, but the underlying message was clear: I was pushing myself toward inevitable physical breakdown. "Mark, you need to consider what this is doing to Claire's future," she told my father during a conversation in February. "Even if she somehow made the team, which statistics show is highly unlikely, what kind of life is she preparing for afterward? She's sacrificing her education, her social development, her chance at a normal relationship. You're allowing her to become obsessed with something that will end badly." The psychological pressure of Linda's constant negativity began affecting my performance in ways that were subtle but measurable. My sleep quality decreased as stress and anxiety increased. I found myself second-guessing technique changes that had previously felt natural, wondering if my improvements were real or if I was deluding myself about my progress. Coach Rodriguez noticed the change in my mental state and arranged for me to work with a sports psychologist who specialized in high-performance athletes. Martinez helped me understand that external doubt and criticism were common challenges faced by athletes attempting to reach elite levels, especially those coming from non-traditional backgrounds. Elite athletes often face skepticism from people who can't imagine achieving such heights themselves. Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions, "The criticism usually says more about the person expressing doubt than it does about your actual abilities or potential." Working with Martinez, I learned techniques for managing anxiety and maintaining focus despite external pressure. We practiced visualization exercises where I imagined competing successfully at the trials, dealing with setbacks, and handling both success and disappointment with dignity. These mental training sessions became as important as my physical preparation, but Linda's campaign was evolving beyond family phone calls and dinner table criticism. In March, she began attending local swimming meets, where Tyler was competing for his high school team, using these opportunities to spread her doubts about my abilities to other swimming families and coaches in the Denver area. At one meet, she approached the parent of a swimmer who had competed against me at nationals, questioning whether my times were accurate given the caliber of competition I typically faced. She suggested that swimming in smaller meets with less competitive fields might be inflating my results, making me appear faster than I actually was when compared to swimmers from established programs. These conversations eventually made their way back to me through the tight-knit swimming community. Other athletes' parents began asking subtle questions about my training background, my coach's credentials, and whether I understood the level of competition I would face at trials. The doubt that Linda was spreading was creating a narrative that I was an outsider who didn't belong at the elite level. The financial strain on my family reached a critical point in April when my father's overtime hours were reduced due to seasonal changes at the lumber mill. The income decrease came at exactly the wrong time, as trials preparation required additional coaching, travel to time trials meets, and equipment upgrades that we could no longer afford. Grandmother Helen immediately stepped in to cover the shortfall, but Linda learned about the financial arrangement and used it as ammunition for her argument that my swimming career was destroying the family's financial stability. She called a family meeting at her Denver home, ostensibly to discuss Grandmother Helen's well-being, but actually to stage an intervention about my Olympic pursuit. The meeting included my father, grandmother Linda and her husband David, and Tyler, who seemed uncomfortable with his mother's agenda but unwilling to openly oppose her. Linda had prepared what appeared to be a financial analysis of my swimming expenses over the previous 4 years, complete with charts and projections showing the total cost if I continued competing after the trials. "We need to face reality," Linda announced, displaying her charts with the confidence of a business presentation. "Claire's swimming has cost this family over $60,000 in the past 4 years. Helen has mortgaged her property twice to support these expenses. Mark is working himself into exhaustion with overtime shifts, and for what? A 1 in a million chance that might not even materialize." She continued her presentation by comparing my times to those of swimmers who had made previous Olympic teams, pointing out that my rankings were borderline for making the finals at trials, let alone making the team itself. Her research was thorough and her presentation professional, making her arguments seem logical and well-reasoned rather than emotional or vindictive. "I'm not saying this to be cruel," she concluded. "I'm saying it because I love this family and I can see what this obsession is doing to all of us. Claire is a talented swimmer, but talent isn't enough at this level. She needs to accept that she's reached her ceiling and start building a realistic future." My grandmother's response surprised everyone in the room. Helen had always been diplomatic in family discussions, preferring to avoid conflict and maintain peace. But Linda's attack on my dreams and her attempt to manipulate family finances into a weapon against my goals triggered a strength and clarity that commanded immediate attention. "Linda, you've never supported Claire's dreams, and that's your choice," Helen said, her voice steady but firm. "But you don't get to decide how I spend my money or what I choose to support. Claire has worked harder than anyone in this family has ever worked for anything. She's earned the right to find out how far her talent can take her." The confrontation escalated when Linda accused my grandmother of being manipulated by my unrealistic expectations and suggested that elderly people were often taken advantage of by family members with selfish motives. The accusation crossed a line that even David, Linda's usually supportive husband, couldn't ignore. "That's enough, Linda," David said, his discomfort obvious. "You're talking about a young woman who's dedicated her entire life to achieving something extraordinary. Whether she succeeds or not, she deserves support from her family, not constant criticism." But Linda's response revealed the true depth of her hostility toward my goals. "Support. We've been enabling a fantasy that's preventing Claire from growing up and accepting reality. Do you want to know what I really think? I think she's scared of real life, scared of getting a job and building an adult relationship and taking responsibility for herself. Swimming gives her an excuse to avoid all of that." The meeting ended with my father and grandmother leaving abruptly, but the damage was done. Linda had succeeded in creating doubt and tension within our family support system at the most critical time in my preparation. The stress of the confrontation affected everyone differently, but for me it crystallized something important about the nature of the challenge I was facing. I realized that proving Linda wrong had become as important as achieving my Olympic dreams, not because I wanted revenge, but because her doubt represented every voice that had ever told a small-town athlete that their dreams were too big, their background too limited, their resources too modest to compete at the highest level. The final month before trials became a period of intense focus and deliberate isolation from family drama. Coach Rodriguez arranged for me to train at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs for 2 weeks, giving me access to world-class facilities and the opportunity to train alongside other elite swimmers preparing for trials. The experience was both inspiring and intimidating. Training with swimmers who had international experience and Olympic medals exposed me to a level of professionalism and technical sophistication that was completely different from anything I had experienced. But it also confirmed that I belonged at this level, that my times and training were legitimate regardless of where they had been achieved. During my time at the training center, I received a phone call from Tyler that provided insight into the growing tension in Linda's marriage. Tyler revealed that his mother's obsession with my swimming career was affecting her relationship with David, who was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with her hostility toward me. "Mom talks about you constantly," Tyler told me during our phone conversation. "Dad thinks she's becoming obsessed with proving you'll fail. He said it's not healthy for her to be so invested in someone else's disappointment." Tyler also shared that Linda had been researching other swimmers competing at trials, looking for evidence that my qualifying times were achieved in lesser competition or that my ranking was inflated compared to swimmers from traditional programs. Her research had become so extensive that she could recite the training backgrounds and career trajectories of dozens of elite swimmers. She's convinced that you're going to be embarrassed at trials. Tyler continued. She keeps saying that when you don't make finals, everyone will realize that she was right about small-town athletes not belonging at this level. The conversation with Tyler was revealing because it showed that Linda's campaign against my dreams had evolved beyond family concern into something resembling personal vendetta. Her investment in my failure had become so complete that my success would represent not just the achievement of my goals but a fundamental challenge to her worldview about limitations and possibilities. 3 weeks before trials, I achieved a personal best time at a tune-up meet that moved me from 8th to 4th in national rankings for my primary event. The time was fast enough to make me a legitimate contender for the Olympic team, not just a trials participant hoping to gain experience. My father called immediately after the race, his excitement and pride evident in his voice. "Claire, that was incredible. Coach Rodriguez said that time would have won nationals last year. You're really going to do this." But when news of my breakthrough performance reached Linda, her response was swift and devastating. She called my father that same evening not to congratulate me on the achievement but to express concern that the pressure of sudden success might be more than I could handle psychologically. "Mark, I'm worried about what happens if Claire actually makes the team," she said, her voice filled with false concern. "She's never competed at the international level, she's never dealt with that kind of media attention or pressure. What if she cracks under the spotlight? What if she embarrasses herself and the family on the biggest stage in sports?" Linda's ability to find negatives in every positive development revealed the true nature of her opposition to my dreams. Success didn't validate my efforts in her eyes, it only created new opportunities for failure and embarrassment. Her doubt was no longer about protecting me from disappointment. It was about protecting herself from being proven wrong about the limitations she had assigned to my potential. The week before I left for trials, Grandmother Helen invited me to spend an afternoon at her ranch, away from the pressure and expectations that had surrounded my preparation. We sat on her front porch watching the sunset over the mountains, talking about everything except swimming and competition. "Claire, I want you to know something," she said, as we watched the light fade from the sky. "Regardless of what happens at trials, you've already achieved something extraordinary. You've shown that dreams aren't limited by geography, or resources or other people's expectations. That's a victory that no one can take away from you." Her words provided a perspective that I carried with me as I prepared to leave for trials. The competition would determine whether I made the Olympic team, but my grandmother was right. I had already proven that a girl from Riverside, Colorado could compete at the highest level of her sport. Linda's campaign of doubt had continued right up until my departure, but it had also revealed something important about the nature of dreams and the people who support or oppose them. Some people are threatened by others' aspirations because success challenges their own assumptions about what's possible. Linda's opposition to my goals said more about her limitations than mine. As I packed for trials, I carried with me not just the technical preparation and physical conditioning that would determine my performance, but also the emotional armor that had been forged through months of doubt, criticism, and family conflict. Linda had tried to tear down my confidence, but instead she had taught me that external doubt could only limit me if I chose to internalize it. The trials were 5 days away, and I had never been more ready to show the world what I was capable of achieving. The Olympic Trials facility in Omaha, Nebraska, represented everything I had dreamed about since I first began swimming competitively. The temporary pool complex seated 15,000 spectators, with television cameras positioned at every angle and warm-up areas that buzzed with the controlled energy of the fastest swimmers in the country. Walking into the venue for the first time, I felt a mixture of awe and belonging that surprised me. Despite Linda's constant suggestions that I was out of place at this level, being surrounded by elite athletes felt natural rather than intimidating. My times belonged here, my preparation had been thorough, and my confidence was genuine rather than manufactured. The preliminary sessions would determine who advanced to the semi-final rounds, which in turn would determine the 8 swimmers who competed for the 3 Olympic team spots in each event. My primary event, the 200-meter freestyle, was scheduled for the 4th day of competition, giving me time to acclimate to the venue and watch other races before my own competition began. Coach Rodriguez had arranged for us to stay at a hotel 20 minutes from the venue, far enough from the main athlete accommodations to avoid distractions but close enough for easy transportation. My father had driven from Colorado to provide support, taking vacation time from the mill that he couldn't afford to lose, but refusing to miss the most important competition of my career. The first 3 days of trials provided opportunities to observe the level of competition and the atmosphere of pressure that surrounded each race. Swimmers I had only seen on television were warming up in the same pool where I would compete, their preparation routines revealing the meticulous attention to detail that separated elite performers from everyone else. During warm-ups for my first preliminary race, I noticed Tyler in the spectator section with David, Linda's husband. Tyler waved enthusiastically, clearly excited to watch me compete at this level, but Linda was notably absent. I assumed she had chosen not to attend, preferring to avoid witnessing what she had predicted would be my inevitable disappointment. The preliminary race went exactly as Coach Rodriguez and I had planned. I qualified 4th overall for the semifinals with a time that was within 2 seconds of my personal best, demonstrating that I could handle the pressure and venue without compromising my performance. The result positioned me perfectly for the semifinal race, where the top 2 finishers would automatically qualify for the Olympic team, and the swimmers placing 3rd through 6th would compete in a swim-off for the final team position. After the preliminary race, my father's excitement was infectious. "Claire, you looked so smooth out there. I could tell you had more in reserve. Tomorrow night you're going to show everyone what you're really capable of." But our celebration was interrupted by an unexpected phone call from Tyler, who seemed distressed about something that had happened during the preliminary session. "Claire, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Mom showed up right before your race, but she wasn't sitting with us. She was in the media area talking to reporters." My stomach dropped as Tyler continued his explanation. Linda had apparently contacted several sports journalists before trials, positioning herself as a family member willing to provide background information about my unusual path to elite swimming. She had presented herself as concerned about the pressure I was facing and the expectations that had been placed on a swimmer from such a non-traditional background. She told them that the family was worried about how you would handle the spotlight if you actually made the team, Tyler revealed. She said that small-town athletes sometimes struggled with the pressure of international competition and that everyone hoped you wouldn't be overwhelmed by the experience. The revelation that Linda was actively working to undermine my confidence through media manipulation felt like a betrayal that went beyond family disagreement. She wasn't just expressing doubt privately, she was creating a public narrative designed to diminish my achievements and establish expectations for my failure. Coach Rodriguez's response to learning about Linda's media campaign was swift and protective. "We're not engaging with this nonsense," he said firmly. "Your job is to swim fast tomorrow night. Everything else is distraction and noise." But the knowledge that Linda was working behind the scenes to sabotage my reputation created a new layer of pressure that I hadn't anticipated. The semifinal race wasn't just about making the Olympic team, it was about proving that her predictions of embarrassment and failure were wrong. The day of the semifinal brought an intensity of nerves that I had never experienced before. My warm-up felt sluggish, my timing seemed off, and the pressure of knowing that Linda was somewhere in the venue waiting for me to vindicate her doubts made concentration difficult. 2 hours before my race, I received a text message that changed everything. It was from my grandmother Helen, who was watching the competition on television from her ranch in Colorado. "Claire, I just saw an interview with your aunt on the pre-race coverage. She said some hurtful things, but I want you to know that her words don't define you or limit what you can achieve tonight. Swim for yourself and for everyone who believes in your dreams." I turned on the television in the athlete lounge and found the interview that my grandmother had referenced. Linda was speaking with a network reporter about the pressure facing first-time Olympic trial participants, using my name and background as specific examples of the challenges that non-traditional athletes faced at this level. "Claire Thompson is a lovely girl, with tremendous heart," Linda said, her voice filled with false warmth and concern. "But I think it's important to remember that making an Olympic team requires more than just fast times. It requires experience with pressure, familiarity with international competition, and the kind of mental toughness that usually comes from years of training at elite facilities." The interviewer asked Linda about my chances of making the team, and her response was carefully crafted to sound supportive while actually expressing doubt. "We're all very proud of how far Claire has come, regardless of what happens tonight. Sometimes the greatest victory is just making it to this level and gaining experience for the future." Watching Linda undermine my chances on national television while pretending to be supportive felt like a violation that went beyond anything she had done before. She was using her position as my aunt to establish credibility with reporters, while actively working to lower expectations and prepare the audience for my failure. The anger I felt watching that interview became fuel for my performance in ways that I hadn't expected. Linda's campaign of doubt had been designed to weaken my confidence, but instead it clarified my motivation and sharpened my focus. I wasn't just swimming for myself or for Olympic qualification, I was swimming to prove that her limitations didn't apply to me. Warm-ups for the semi-final went perfectly. My stroke felt smooth and powerful, my timing was precise, and the nervousness that had plagued me earlier in the day had transformed into controlled excitement. Coach Rodriguez noticed the change in my demeanor and nodded approvingly as I completed my preparation routine. "You look ready," he said simply. "Trust your training and race your own race." The call room where swimmers waited before being introduced to the crowd was silent, except for the sound of deep breathing and quiet visualization. I closed my eyes and ran through my race strategy, focusing on the technical elements that would determine my performance rather than the outcome that would determine my future. When we were introduced to the crowd, I could hear my father's voice above the general applause, but I deliberately avoided looking into the spectator sections where I knew Linda was sitting. This race was about my preparation, my goals, and my willingness to perform under pressure when everything was on the line. The race itself unfolded exactly as Coach Rodriguez and I had visualized during months of preparation. I executed my race strategy perfectly, staying patient through the first 150 meters, before beginning the controlled acceleration that would carry me to the wall. With 50 meters remaining, I was in third place, and gaining on the swimmers ahead of me. The final 25 meters felt like both an eternity and an instant. I could see that I was closing the gap on second place, but I couldn't tell if I had enough pool remaining to make up the difference. I touched the wall completely exhausted, but unsure of my placement until I looked up at the scoreboard and saw my name in second place. I had qualified for the Olympic team. The emotion that overwhelmed me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. 4 years of training, sacrifice, family conflict, and personal doubt had led to this single race, and I had proven that a swimmer from Riverside, Colorado, belonged on the United States Olympic team. My father's celebration in the stands was visible from the pool deck, his joy and vindication evident even from a distance. Coach Rodriguez was crying as he congratulated me, his belief in my potential finally validated on the biggest stage in our sport. But as I completed my post-race interviews and drug testing protocols, I couldn't help but think about Linda and how she was processing the result that contradicted everything she had predicted about my abilities and my future. Tyler found me in the athlete area after the session and told me that Linda had left the venue immediately after my race without speaking to anyone. David had stayed to congratulate me, but Linda had walked out during the medal ceremony, apparently unable to witness the celebration of an achievement she had spent 4 years predicting would never happen. "Mom looked like she was in shock," Tyler said, his own excitement about my success evident in his voice. "I don't think she ever actually believed you would make the team." The realization that Linda had been so invested in my failure, that my success left her speechless, provided a satisfaction that went beyond the achievement itself. Her doubt had been wrong, her predictions had been proven false, and her campaign to limit my dreams had failed completely. But the Olympic team was just the beginning. The real test would come at the Olympics themselves, where I would compete against the fastest swimmers in the world, and where Linda's suggestions about my ability to handle international pressure would be put to the ultimate test. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from David that provided insight into how my Olympic qualification had affected Linda's state of mind. "Claire, I wanted to congratulate you again, and let you know that Linda has been struggling with your success," he said, his voice tired and strained. "She's been obsessing over every article written about your team selection, looking for criticism or doubt about your chances at the Olympics. She can't seem to accept that she was wrong about your potential." David's call revealed that Linda's inability to acknowledge my success was creating problems in her own life. Her investment in my failure had been so complete that my achievement represented a fundamental challenge to her worldview that she was unable to process or accept. "I think she's embarrassed about the things she said to reporters," David continued. "She realizes that if you medal at the Olympics, those interviews are going to make her look foolish and unsupportive. The Olympics were 6 weeks away, and I was training harder than ever before. But Linda's campaign of doubt had taught me something valuable about the nature of dreams and the people who support or oppose them. External doubt could only limit me if I chose to believe it, and I had learned to use criticism as motivation rather than allowing it to undermine my confidence. The girl from Riverside, Colorado, was going to the Olympics, and no amount of family doubt or media manipulation could change that reality. The Olympic Village in Paris represented the culmination of everything I had worked toward for the past decade. Walking through the athletes' quarters surrounded by competitors from every sport and every nation felt surreal, like stepping into a dream that had somehow become reality despite every obstacle that had been placed in my path. My event was scheduled for the 6th day of competition, giving me time to acclimate to the venue and observe other swimmers competing in their races. The aquatic center was magnificent, with a capacity of 15,000 spectators and broadcast capabilities that would bring my race to millions of viewers worldwide, including everyone back home in Riverside who had supported my journey. Coach Rodriguez had prepared meticulously for every aspect of the Olympic experience. We had studied video of my competitors, analyzed their racing strategies, and developed tactical approaches for different scenarios that might unfold during my race. My preparation had been thorough, but the pressure of competing on the world's biggest stage created mental challenges that were unlike anything I had faced before. The media attention surrounding my story had intensified since trials. Journalists were fascinated by the narrative of a small-town swimmer competing against athletes from established programs with world-class facilities and unlimited resources. Several feature articles had been written about my journey, including interviews with my father, grandmother, and Coach Rodriguez about the sacrifices and support that had made my Olympic dream possible. But the media coverage also included the interviews that Linda had given before and during trials, where she had expressed doubt about my ability to handle international pressure and suggested that my success might be temporary. Those quotes were now being revisited by journalists as my Olympic competition approached, creating a narrative tension between family support and family doubt that added complexity to my story. 3 days before my race, I received an unexpected phone call from Tyler that provided insight into how my Olympic qualification had continued to affect Linda's mental state. "Claire, I need to tell you something about Mom," he said, his voice filled with concern and embarrassment. "She's been obsessing over your Olympics coverage. She watches every interview, reads every article, and she's become convinced that you're going to fail spectacularly on the biggest stage. She keeps saying that international competition is completely different from anything you've experienced before." Tyler revealed that Linda had been researching my competitors extensively, studying their training backgrounds and international experience to build a case for why they would defeat me decisively. Her research had become so detailed that she could recite the career achievements and personal best times of every swimmer in my event. "She's been calling relatives and telling them not to get their hopes up because the Olympics are going to prove that she was right about your limitations all along," Tyler continued. "Dad is getting really frustrated with her behavior. He thinks she's become unhealthily invested in your failure." The knowledge that Linda was still actively working to undermine my confidence even as I prepared for the biggest race of my life was disturbing, but it also provided clarity about my motivation. I wasn't just swimming for personal achievement or national pride, I was swimming to prove that small-town dreams could compete with unlimited resources, and that family doubt couldn't limit what was possible with enough determination and support. 2 days before my race, grandmother Helen called to provide encouragement and perspective that helped calm my pre-competition nerves. "Claire, I want you to know that everyone in Riverside is planning to watch your race together at the community center," she said, her voice filled with pride and excitement. "The mayor has declared it an official town celebration, and local businesses are closing early so their employees can attend. Regardless of how you place, you've already brought our town together in a way that hasn't happened in decades." Her words reminded me that my Olympic experience represented more than personal achievement. I was carrying the dreams and support of an entire community that had invested emotionally and financially in my success. The pressure was enormous, but so was the foundation of support that had made this moment possible. The day of my race brought a clarity and focus that surprised me. Instead of overwhelming nerves, I felt calm and prepared, confident in my training, and ready to execute the race strategy that Coach Rodriguez and I had perfected over months of preparation. My warm-up went smoothly, my stroke felt powerful and efficient, and my timing was precise. In the call room before the race, I closed my eyes and visualized not just my own performance, but also my father watching from the stands, my grandmother viewing from her ranch in Colorado, and the entire town of Riverside gathered at the community center. I thought about Coach Rodriguez's unwavering belief in my potential and the sacrifices that so many people had made to support my dreams. But I also thought about Linda, somewhere in Denver, watching the race and hoping to see validation of her years of doubt and criticism. That motivation was different from the positive support that had sustained me through training, but it was equally powerful in its ability to focus my determination and sharpen my competitive edge. When we were introduced to the crowd, the roar of 15,000 spectators was deafening. I could see American flags scattered throughout the venue and knew that millions of people were watching the broadcast, including everyone whose support or doubt had shaped my journey to this moment. The race itself unfolded like a perfect execution of everything Coach Rodriguez and I had practiced. I stayed patient through the first 100 meters, maintaining contact with the leaders while conserving energy for the final sprint. At the 150-meter mark, I was in fourth place but gaining on the swimmers ahead of me. The final 50 meters felt like both a sprint and a meditation. I could see that I was closing the gap on the leaders, but I couldn't tell if I had enough pool remaining to reach the podium positions. My stroke rate increased, my kick became more aggressive, and I found a level of speed that felt faster than anything I had ever achieved before. I touched the wall completely exhausted and immediately looked up at the scoreboard to see my placement. The numbers seemed impossible at first: second place, with a time that was over 3 seconds faster than my personal best and fast enough to break the American record in my event. I had won an Olympic silver medal. The emotion that overwhelmed me was indescribable. Years of training, sacrifice, family conflict and personal doubt had led to this single race, and I had exceeded every expectation that had been placed on my performance. The girl from Riverside, Colorado, was standing on an Olympic podium with a medal around her neck. Coach Rodriguez was crying as he embraced me after the race, his belief in my potential finally validated on the biggest stage in international swimming. "You didn't just swim fast," he said through his tears. "You swam the race of your life when it mattered most." The post-race interviews were a blur of questions about my background, my training, and my feelings about exceeding expectations on the Olympic stage. Journalists wanted to know about the small-town support that had made my success possible and the unconventional path that had led me to international competition. But one question stood out from all the others. "Claire, your aunt gave several interviews before the Olympics expressing doubt about your ability to handle this level of pressure. How does it feel to prove those predictions wrong?" My response was measured and gracious, focusing on the positive support I had received rather than the doubt that had been expressed. "My family has been incredibly supportive throughout this journey," I said. "Sometimes people have different perspectives on what's possible, and I understand that my path to this level has been unconventional. But I'm grateful for everyone who believed in my dreams and helped make this moment possible." After completing my media obligations and drug testing protocols, I finally had time to process what had just happened. I had not only made the Olympic team but had won a medal, setting an American record in the process. Every prediction about my limitations had been proven wrong in the most public and definitive way possible. My father found me in the athlete area, his joy and vindication evident in every word he spoke. "Claire, I am so proud of you I can barely speak," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You've shown the world that dreams aren't limited by where you come from or what resources you have. You've proven that heart and determination can compete with anything." But it was Tyler's phone call later that evening that provided the most insight into how my Olympic performance had affected Linda's state of mind. "Claire, I had to call you immediately," he said, his excitement obvious even through the phone connection. "Mom watched your race at home by herself. Dad said she didn't speak for over an hour after you won the medal. She just sat staring at the television screen like she couldn't process what had happened." Tyler revealed that Linda's inability to acknowledge my success had reached a breaking point during the Olympic broadcast. Her years of predictions about my inevitable failure had been so completely contradicted by my performance that she was unable to formulate any response or explanation. She finally said that the competition must have been weaker than usual, or that you got lucky with your lane assignment. Tyler continued. But even she seemed to realize how ridiculous that sounded. "Dad told her that she needed to accept that she had been wrong about your potential." The conversation revealed that Linda's investment in my failure had been so complete that my success represented a fundamental challenge to her worldview that she was unable to process or accept. Her doubt had been proven wrong in the most public and definitive way possible, and she had no framework for understanding how her predictions could have been so inaccurate. 3 days later, I received a text message from Linda that would be the last direct communication I ever had with her. The message was brief and filled with forced congratulations that revealed her ongoing inability to genuinely acknowledge my achievement. "Congratulations on your medal. I hope you understand that my concerns came from a place of caring about your future." The message contained no apology for the years of doubt and criticism, no acknowledgement of how wrong her predictions had been, and no recognition of the harm that her campaign against my dreams had caused. It was a final attempt to reframe her opposition as concern, rather than admitting that her doubts had been baseless and destructive. But her inability to genuinely celebrate my success or acknowledge her mistakes didn't diminish the satisfaction of proving her wrong. The Olympic medal around my neck was tangible proof that small-town dreams could compete on the world's biggest stage, and that family doubt couldn't limit what was possible with enough determination and support. The flight home from Paris felt like a journey between two different worlds. I was returning to Riverside as an Olympic medalist, carrying with me not just a silver medal but proof that dreams could survive doubt, criticism, and family conflict. The girl who had left Colorado amid questions about her ability to compete internationally was returning as an American record holder who had exceeded every expectation placed on her performance. The homecoming celebration that Riverside had planned was beyond anything I could have imagined. Main Street was lined with banners and American flags. Local businesses had created window displays celebrating my achievement, and hundreds of people gathered at the community center for a reception that felt like the entire town's validation of a dream they had supported for years. My father spoke at the celebration, his voice filled with emotion as he thanked the community for their support and acknowledged the sacrifices that so many people had made to help me reach this moment. "Claire's success belongs to all of us," he said, looking out at the crowd of neighbors and friends who had followed my journey. "This medal represents what's possible when a community believes in someone's dreams." Grandmother Helen was presented with a special recognition for her financial support and unwavering belief in my potential. At 80 years old, she had risked her retirement security to fund my training, and seeing her celebrated by the entire town for her courage and generosity was almost as meaningful as winning the medal itself. Coach Rodriguez received similar recognition for his role in developing my talent and believing in my potential when others expressed doubt. "I've coached for 30 years, he told the crowd, but I've never worked with an athlete who combined talent with determination the way Claire does. This medal is the result of her willingness to work harder than anyone thought." Was part 3. The breaking point and public exposure. The weeks following my breakthrough time at the tune-up meet should have been filled with excitement and confidence as the Olympic trials approached. Instead, they became a period of escalating psychological warfare as Linda's campaign against my dreams reached its most destructive phase. The morning after my record-breaking swim, I woke to 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to someone in my family, but as I read through the messages, I realized the emergency was of Linda's own creation. She had spent the night calling every family member she could reach, not to celebrate my achievement, but to express urgent concern about what she termed unrealistic expectations that were being placed on my shoulders. According to the messages I received from various relatives, Linda was worried that my sudden success would create pressure that I wasn't psychologically prepared to handle. She called me at midnight. My cousin Sarah texted from Wyoming. She was crying and saying that everyone was setting you up for a devastating fall. She thinks you're going to have a breakdown when you realize you can't actually compete with world-class swimmers. The pattern of Linda's late-night calls revealed a level of desperation and obsession that went far beyond normal family concern. She had contacted aunts, uncles, and cousins across 3 states, painting a picture of a young woman being pushed beyond her capabilities by family members who didn't understand the psychological demands of elite competition. But Linda's overnight campaign was just the beginning. Over the following days, she began reaching out to people outside our immediate family, using her research skills and professional connections to spread doubt about my legitimacy as an elite athlete. She contacted the sports editor of the Denver newspaper, introducing herself as a family member with concerns about the pressure being placed on local Olympic hopefuls. She suggested that young athletes from non-traditional backgrounds were sometimes overwhelmed by sudden success, and that the media should be aware of the psychological challenges facing first-time Olympic contenders. The resulting article wasn't directly critical of me, but it included quotes from Linda about the importance of managing expectations and supporting young athletes through the emotional challenges of high-level competition. To readers unfamiliar with our family dynamics, her comments appeared thoughtful and caring. To those who knew the history of her opposition to my dreams, they represented a sophisticated form of sabotage. Coach Rodriguez discovered Linda's media manipulation when a reporter called him requesting comment on the family concerns that had been raised about my mental preparation. Someone claiming to be your aunt contacted our sports desk, the reporter explained. She suggested that your recent success might be creating unrealistic pressure and wondered if you had access to appropriate psychological support. The revelation that Linda was actively working with media outlets to plant stories about my mental state felt like a violation that transcended normal family disagreement. She wasn't just expressing private doubts, she was creating public narratives designed to undermine confidence in my abilities and preparation. This is harassment, Coach Rodriguez said after we discussed the situation. She's trying to sabotage your preparation by creating external pressure and doubt. We need to document this behavior in case it escalates further. But Linda's campaign was far from finished. She began attending local swimming meets throughout Colorado, introducing herself to coaches and parents as my aunt and expressing concerns about the training methods and support systems that had produced my recent improvements. At a high school championship meet in Denver, she approached the coach of a swimmer who had competed against me nationally, questioning whether my times were achieved under equivalent competitive conditions. She suggested that swimming in smaller meets with weaker fields might be artificially inflating my results compared to swimmers who consistently faced elite competition. Your aunt seems really worried about you, the coach mentioned to me during a phone conversation about training camps. She thinks you might be in over your head at the international level. She asked a lot of specific questions about your technical development and whether you've been tested against swimmers with international experience. These conversations were making their way back to me through the interconnected swimming community, creating a whisper campaign that suggested I was unprepared for the level of competition I would face at trials. The doubt that Linda was spreading was subtle but persistent, designed to plant questions about my readiness rather than making direct accusations about my abilities. The psychological impact of knowing that someone in my own family was actively working to undermine my confidence was more damaging than any training setback I had experienced. Sleep became difficult as anxiety increased, and I found myself second-guessing technical adjustments that had previously felt natural and automatic. Dr. Martinez, the sports psychologist, helped me understand that Linda's behavior represented a form of psychological manipulation that was unfortunately common in high-pressure athletic environments. Some people are so threatened by others' success that they will actively work to prevent it. She explained during one of our sessions. Your aunt's behavior suggests that your success challenges her worldview in ways that she finds unacceptable. Rather than adjusting her perspective, she's attempting to sabotage your achievements to validate her original doubts. Working with Dr. Martinez, I developed strategies for compartmentalizing Linda's negativity and maintaining focus on my preparation despite external psychological pressure. We practiced techniques for handling criticism and doubt, both from family members and from media coverage that might be influenced by her campaign. But Linda's most devastating attack was yet to come. 2 weeks before trials, she orchestrated what can only be described as a family intervention designed to convince me to withdraw from competition before I could embarrass myself and the family on a national stage. The intervention was carefully planned and professionally executed. Linda invited my father, grandmother, and several other family members to her Denver home under the pretense of discussing travel arrangements for trials. When everyone arrived, they discovered that Linda had prepared a presentation complete with research, statistics, and what she claimed was professional psychological analysis. I've been doing extensive research on the demands of Olympic-level competition, Linda announced, displaying charts and graphs with the confidence of a medical professional. I've consulted with sports psychologists about the psychological profile required for success at this level, and I'm concerned that Claire doesn't understand what she's facing. Her presentation included statistics about the percentage of first-time Olympic trial participants who successfully made teams, data about the performance differences between swimmers from established programs versus those from smaller training environments, and research about the psychological impact of high-profile failure on young athletes. I'm not trying to be discouraging, Linda continued, her voice filled with false concern and professional authority. But someone needs to protect Claire from a potentially devastating experience. The statistics show that swimmers with her background have less than a 5% chance of making the team, and the psychological impact of falling short on such a public stage can be career-ending. She had prepared testimonials from sports psychologists about the importance of realistic goal setting and the dangers of placing young athletes in situations where they were likely to experience public failure. Her research was thorough, her presentation was convincing, and her arguments were designed to appear protective rather than destructive. What I'm suggesting, Linda concluded, is that Claire consider withdrawing from trials and focusing on realistic goals like collegiate competition or masters swimming. She could avoid the trauma of public failure and build a sustainable relationship with the sport that doesn't require risking her psychological well-being. The silence that followed her presentation was deafening. Linda had spent weeks preparing arguments designed to convince my support system that my Olympic dreams were not just unlikely but potentially harmful to my mental health and future relationship with swimming. My father was the first to respond, his anger barely controlled as he processed what Linda had just proposed. Are you seriously suggesting that Claire should quit 2 weeks before the biggest competition of her life because you've decided she can't handle the pressure? But Linda was prepared for resistance. Mark, I understand that you want to support Claire's dreams, but sometimes love means protecting someone from their own unrealistic expectations. The psychological research is clear about the impact of high-profile failure on young athletes. Grandmother Helen's response surprised everyone in the room. Rather than engaging with Linda's arguments or statistics, she simply asked a question that cut through all the professional presentation and research. Linda, why are you so invested in Claire's failure? The question hung in the air like an accusation, forcing Linda to confront the true motivation behind her months of research and campaign against my dreams. Her response revealed the depth of her psychological investment in my disappointment. I'm trying to protect this family from the embarrassment of watching Claire fail on national television, Linda said, her composure finally cracking under the weight of her grandmother's direct challenge. Do you want to see her eliminated in preliminary rounds while commentators discuss how unprepared she is for this level of competition? The mask of professional concern had finally slipped, revealing the true nature of Linda's opposition. She wasn't worried about my psychological well-being, she was terrified that my success would prove her years of doubt and criticism wrong. My potential failure would validate her worldview, while my success would expose her limitations and prejudices. You're not protecting anyone, my father said, his voice rising with anger that had been building for months. You're trying to sabotage Claire's dreams because you can't stand the possibility that she might prove you wrong about what's possible. The confrontation escalated quickly from there. Linda accused my father of enabling dangerous delusions, while he accused her of psychological manipulation and family sabotage. Other relatives took sides, creating fractures in family relationships that would take years to heal. But the most revealing moment came when Linda's husband David finally spoke up, his discomfort with his wife's behavior becoming impossible to ignore. Linda, this has gone too far, he said quietly. You've become obsessed with proving that Claire will fail. It's not healthy for you or for anyone else. The intervention ended with my father and grandmother leaving immediately, but not before Linda made one final prediction that would haunt the remaining weeks of my preparation. When Claire fails at trials, and she will fail, I want everyone to remember that I tried to prevent this disaster. I tried to protect her from public humiliation. The psychological impact of Linda's intervention was immediate and devastating. Knowing that someone in my own family had worked so systematically to undermine my confidence and convince others that I was destined for failure, created doubt that went beyond normal pre-competition nerves. Sleep became nearly impossible, as anxiety and anger competed for dominance in my thoughts. Training sessions felt mechanical rather than inspired, and I found myself questioning every aspect of my preparation despite months of evidence that I was ready for this level of competition. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of Linda's campaign was the way it had infected my support system with doubt. While my father and grandmother remained committed to supporting my dreams, I could see uncertainty in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Linda's professional presentation and psychological research had planted questions about my readiness that created tension within the family foundation that had sustained me through years of preparation. Coach Rodriguez became my primary source of stability during this period, providing both technical guidance and psychological support as we navigated the final weeks before trials. Linda's behavior tells us everything we need to know about her character and nothing about your abilities, he reminded me daily. Your times don't lie, your preparation has been thorough, and your improvement trajectory shows that you're peaking at exactly the right time. Don't let one person's psychological problems become your limitation. But the damage had been done. Linda's intervention had succeeded in creating exactly the kind of doubt and pressure that she claimed to be protecting me from. The irony was devastating. Her efforts to prevent my psychological breakdown were actually creating the mental challenges that could undermine my performance. 1 week before trials, I made a decision that would define my approach to the competition and my relationship with Linda's doubt. I wrote her a letter that I never intended to send, but that helped clarify my own thoughts about the situation and my determination to succeed despite her opposition. Linda, I wrote, you have spent months trying to convince me and everyone else that I don't belong at the highest level of my sport. You have researched my competitors, questioned my preparation, and created doubt where there should be confidence. But what you don't understand is that your opposition has taught me something valuable about the nature of dreams and the people who support or attack them. Your doubt says more about your limitations than mine. Your investment in my failure reveals your own fear of what might be possible if someone refuses to accept the boundaries that others try to place on their potential. I am going to trials not just to pursue my Olympic dreams, but to prove that your vision of what's possible is too small to contain what I'm capable of achieving. Writing that letter provided clarity and resolve that had been missing since Linda's intervention. I realized that her campaign against my dreams had actually prepared me for the pressure and doubt that I would face at trials, where critics and skeptics would question whether a swimmer from a small town belonged on the same pool deck as athletes from established programs. The final week of preparation was focused and determined in ways that surprised everyone around me. Instead of allowing Linda's doubt to create anxiety, I used it as motivation for proving that her predictions were wrong. Her years of opposition had taught me that external doubt could only limit me if I chose to internalize it. 5 days before leaving for trials, I received an unexpected phone call from Tyler that provided insight into how Linda was processing my continued determination to compete despite her intervention. Claire, Mom is really struggling with the fact that you didn't withdraw from trials, he said, his voice filled with concern about his mother's mental state. She was convinced that once the family heard her presentation about the psychological risks, you would realize that competing was too dangerous. She can't understand why you're still planning to race. Tyler revealed that Linda's investment in my withdrawal had been so complete that my continued preparation for trials represented a personal failure that she was struggling to process. Her identity had become tied to protecting the family from my inevitable disappointment, and my refusal to accept her protection challenged her sense of purpose and authority. She keeps saying that when you fail at trials, it will prove that no one listens to her even when she's trying to help. Tyler continued, but Dad thinks she's more worried about what happens if you actually succeed. He says she's invested so much in predicting your failure that your success would be harder for her to handle than your disappointment. The conversation with Tyler provided final confirmation of what I had suspected about Linda's motivation. Her opposition to my dreams wasn't about protecting me from failure, it was about protecting herself from being proven wrong about the limitations she had assigned to my potential. 3 days before leaving for trials, I had one final conversation with grandmother Helen that provided perspective and strength for everything that was about to unfold. Claire, I want you to know that regardless of what happens at trials, you've already achieved something extraordinary, she said as we sat on her front porch watching the sunset over the mountains. You've shown that dreams aren't limited by other people's expectations or fears. You've proven that someone from our small town can prepare for the highest level of competition in the world. That's a victory that no one can take away from you, regardless of how you place in your races. Her words provided the final piece of psychological preparation that I needed for trials. Linda's campaign had been designed to make me doubt my readiness and my right to compete at this level, but instead it had taught me that confidence comes from internal conviction rather than external validation. As I packed for trials, I carried with me not just the technical preparation and physical conditioning that would determine my performance, but also the emotional strength that had been forged through months of family conflict and psychological pressure. Linda had tried to break my spirit, but instead she had taught me that dreams could survive doubt, criticism, and even family opposition. The trials were 2 days away, and I had never been more ready to prove that her limitations didn't apply to me. Part 4. The Ultimate Vindication and Family Revelation. The morning of my Olympic trials preliminary race dawned with the kind of nervous energy that every athlete dreams of experiencing. After months of Linda's psychological warfare and family intervention attempts, I was finally at the moment where performance would speak louder than doubt, where years of preparation would determine whether her predictions of failure or my dreams of success would prove accurate. Coach Rodriguez had arranged for our team to arrive at the venue 3 hours before my session, giving me time to acclimate to the facility and complete my preparation routine without feeling rushed. The Omaha Aquatic Center was everything I had imagined and more, with its soaring architecture and broadcast capabilities that would bring my race to millions of viewers, including everyone back home in Riverside. My father had made the drive from Colorado with several relatives who had chosen to support my Olympic pursuit despite Linda's attempts to convince them that attending would only result in witnessing my public embarrassment. Their presence in the stands represented more than family support. It was validation that her campaign of doubt hadn't succeeded in turning my entire support system against my dreams. But Linda was also in Omaha, staying at a different hotel and maintaining distance from our group, while still positioning herself to witness what she remained convinced would be the vindication of her months of warnings about unrealistic expectations and inevitable disappointment. Tyler had called the night before to warn me about his mother's state of mind and her continued investment in my failure. Mom has been obsessing over every detail of the competition format, he revealed during our conversation. She knows exactly what times will be required to make semifinals, and she's convinced that the pressure of preliminaries will cause you to swim significantly slower than your recent personal bests. The knowledge that Linda was in the venue specifically hoping to witness my failure created a different kind of motivation than I had experienced in previous competitions. This wasn't just about pursuing personal goals or representing my country, it was about proving that her vision of limitations didn't apply to someone willing to work harder than anyone thought necessary. My warm-up session went perfectly, with my stroke feeling smooth and powerful, and my timing precisely calibrated for the race strategy that Coach Rodriguez and I had developed over months of preparation. The pool felt fast, the conditions were ideal, and my confidence was grounded in technical preparation rather than wishful thinking. In the ready room where swimmers waited before being called to the blocks, I closed my eyes and visualized not just my own race execution, but also the faces of everyone who had supported my journey. I thought about my father's double shifts at the lumber mill, my grandmother's willingness to mortgage her ranch, and Coach Rodriguez's unwavering belief in my potential when others expressed doubt. But I also thought about Linda, somewhere in the spectator sections, watching and waiting for confirmation that her years of opposition had been justified. That motivation was different from the positive support that had sustained me through training, but it was equally powerful in its ability to focus my determination and clarify my competitive purpose. When we were introduced to the crowd, I could hear the distinctive cheers of the Riverside contingent that had made the trip to support me, their voices cutting through the general applause and reminding me that I was representing more than just personal ambition. But I also knew that Linda was listening to those same cheers, probably interpreting them as misguided enthusiasm that would make my inevitable disappointment more painful for everyone involved. The race itself unfolded like a perfect execution of everything Coach Rodriguez and I had visualized during our preparation. I stayed patient through the first 100 meters, maintaining contact with the leaders while conserving energy for the final sprint. At the halfway mark, I was in 5th place, and exactly where I needed to be according to our race strategy. The third 100 meters felt controlled and strong, with my stroke rate building gradually as I began the acceleration that would carry me through the final sprint. I could see that I was gaining on the swimmers ahead of me, but the competitive field was so tight that small differences in execution would determine final placement. The final 50 meters felt like both an eternity and an instant. I could see that I was closing the gap on the leaders, moving from 5th to 4th to 3rd as my finishing speed proved superior to swimmers who had gone out more aggressively. With 25 meters remaining, I was in 2nd place and gaining on the leader. I touched the wall completely exhausted, but immediately looked up at the scoreboard to see my time and placement. The numbers seemed impossible at first. 1st place, with a time that was over 2 seconds faster than my previous personal best and fast enough to break the American record in my event. I had not only qualified for semifinals, but had done so by winning my preliminary heat with an American record that established me as one of the favorites for the Olympic team. The achievement exceeded every expectation that anyone had placed on my performance, including my own most optimistic projections. Coach Rodriguez was screaming with excitement as he congratulated me, his belief in my potential finally validated in the most public and definitive way possible. "You didn't just swim fast," he said through tears of joy and vindication. "You announced to the swimming world that you belong at this level." The post-race interview area was crowded with journalists who wanted to understand how a swimmer from a small Colorado town had just broken an American record at her first Olympic trials. Their questions focused on my training background, my support system, and my feelings about exceeding expectations so dramatically. But one question stood out from all the others, asked by a reporter who had clearly done research on my family situation. Claire, we understand that not everyone in your family has been supportive of your Olympic pursuit. How does it feel to prove the doubters wrong with a performance like this? My response was measured and diplomatic, focusing on the positive support I had received rather than the family conflict that had shaped my preparation. I've been blessed with incredible support from my father, my grandmother, my coach, and my entire community, I said. There have been different perspectives within my family about what was possible, but today was about swimming fast and taking the first step toward making the Olympic team. After completing my media obligations and drug testing protocols, I finally had time to process what had just happened. I had not only qualified for semifinals, but had done so with a performance that established me as a legitimate contender for the Olympic team. Every prediction about my limitations had been proven wrong in the most public and definitive way possible. My father found me in the athlete area, his joy and vindication evident in every word he spoke. Claire, what you just did was incredible, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. You didn't just swim fast, you showed everyone that dreams aren't limited by other people's expectations. But it was Tyler's phone call 2 hours after my race that provided the most revealing insight into how my performance had affected Linda's psychological state. Claire, I had to call you immediately, he said, his voice filled with excitement and amazement. Mom watched your race from the stands, and her reaction was unlike anything I've ever seen. Tyler revealed that Linda had attended my preliminary session expecting to witness the confirmation of her months of predictions about my inevitable failure. She had positioned herself in the spectator section with a clear view of the pool, apparently prepared to observe my disappointment in elimination from competition. When your name came up first on the scoreboard with an American record, Mom just sat there staring like she couldn't process what had happened. Tyler continued. People around her were cheering and celebrating, but she looked like she was in shock. According to Tyler, Linda's inability to process my success had been immediate and complete. Her years of predictions about my limitations had been so thoroughly contradicted by my performance that she seemed unable to formulate any response or explanation for what she had witnessed. She didn't say a single word for over an hour after your race, Tyler revealed. Dad tried to talk to her about how amazing your swim was, but she just sat there looking confused and upset. It was like her entire worldview had been challenged and she didn't know how to respond. The conversation with Tyler provided insight into the psychological impact that my success was having on someone who had invested so completely in predicting my failure. Linda's opposition to my dreams hadn't been based on realistic assessment of my abilities. It had been rooted in her own limitations and fears about what might be possible. 3 days later, the semifinal race provided an opportunity to build on my preliminary performance and secure a position in the final where the Olympic team would be determined. The pressure was different from preliminaries, because expectations had changed dramatically following my American record, but my confidence was grounded in evidence rather than hope. The semifinal swim was even more controlled and technically precise than my preliminary race. I executed our race strategy perfectly, qualifying second overall for the final with another time that was faster than my previous personal best. I was no longer a swimmer hoping to gain experience at trials. I was a legitimate contender for the Olympic team. Linda's reaction to my semifinal performance was reported to me by several family members who had observed her behavior during the session. According to their accounts, she had become increasingly agitated as it became clear that my success wasn't a fluke or an anomaly, but evidence of genuine preparation and ability. She started questioning whether the timing system was accurate. My cousin Sarah told me during a phone call after semifinals. She suggested that the competition might not be as strong as usual this year, or that other swimmers might be having off days. She was looking for any explanation except that you're actually this fast. The psychological gymnastics that Linda was performing to avoid acknowledging my legitimate success revealed the depth of her investment in my failure. Rather than adjusting her perspective based on evidence, she was searching for alternative explanations that would preserve her original predictions about my limitations. But the most significant development came in a phone call from David, Linda's husband, who reached out to me privately to apologize for his wife's behavior and to express his own amazement at my achievements. Claire, I need to tell you how sorry I am about Linda's treatment of you over the past few years, he said, his voice filled with regret and embarrassment. I've watched her become obsessed with proving that you would fail, and I realize now that I should have stopped her much earlier. What you've accomplished at these trials is extraordinary, and you deserve support from your entire family." David's apology provided insight into the strain that Linda's campaign against my dreams had placed on her own marriage and relationships. Her psychological investment in my failure had become so consuming that it was affecting her ability to maintain normal family relationships and perspective. "She's been different since your preliminary race," David continued. "She can't seem to accept that her predictions were wrong, and she's become increasingly isolated and defensive. I think she realizes that if you make the Olympic team, her years of opposition are going to look foolish and unsupportive." The conversation with David revealed that Linda's inability to acknowledge my success was creating problems in her own life that went beyond family embarrassment. Her identity had become so tied to being the voice of reason about my unrealistic expectations that my achievements represented a fundamental challenge to her sense of self and judgment. The night before the final, I received an unexpected text message from Linda that would be our only direct communication during the entire trials experience. The message was brief and filled with forced congratulations that revealed her ongoing struggle to process my success. "Good luck tomorrow. I hope you swim well and represent the family with dignity." The message contained no acknowledgement of how wrong her predictions had been, no apology for the years of doubt and criticism, and no genuine expression of support for my Olympic dreams. It was a final attempt to maintain some semblance of family relationship while avoiding any admission that her opposition had been baseless and destructive. But her inability to genuinely celebrate my success or acknowledge her mistakes didn't diminish the satisfaction of proving her wrong. The preliminary and semifinal races had established that I belonged at this level, and the final would determine whether I could achieve the Olympic dream that she had spent years predicting was impossible. The morning of the final brought a clarity and focus that surprised me with its intensity. Instead of overwhelming nerves, I felt calm and prepared, confident in my training and ready to race for the Olympic team that Linda had insisted I would never make. As I prepared for warm-ups, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment and the role that Linda's opposition had played in sharpening my determination and clarifying my motivation. Her doubt had been intended to limit my dreams, but instead it had taught me that external criticism could only affect me if I chose to internalize it. The final race was scheduled for that evening, and regardless of the outcome, I had already proven that her vision of limitations was too small to contain what was possible with enough determination, support, and willingness to work harder than anyone thought necessary. Part 5: Olympic Dreams Realized and Family Transformation. The evening of the Olympic trials final arrived with the weight of 4 years of preparation, family conflict, and personal determination converging into a single race that would determine whether my Olympic dreams would become reality or remain unfulfilled aspirations. The preliminary and semi-final races had established my legitimacy as a contender, but this final swim would determine if the girl from Riverside, Colorado, could earn the right to represent her country on the world's biggest athletic stage. The warm-up pool was crowded with the 8 fastest swimmers in the country, each preparing for a race that would determine the 3 Olympic team members in our event. The atmosphere was charged with controlled tension as athletes completed their preparation routines, knowing that months or years of training would culminate in a race lasting less than 2 minutes. My preparation felt smooth and confident, with my stroke mechanics precisely calibrated and my race strategy clearly defined. Coach Rodriguez had spent the morning reviewing technical details and tactical options, but his final words were simple and direct. "You've done the work, you belong here, and you're ready to race for the team." 3 hours before the final session, I received a phone call from grandmother Helen that provided perspective and emotional grounding for the magnitude of the moment. "Claire, I want you to know that everyone in Riverside is gathering at the community center to watch your race," she said, her voice filled with pride and excitement. "The mayor has declared it an official town celebration and local businesses are closing early so their employees can attend. Regardless of how you place tonight, you've already brought our community together in a way that hasn't happened in decades." Her words reminded me that my Olympic pursuit represented more than personal achievement. I was carrying the dreams and support of an entire community that had invested emotionally and financially in my success, creating responsibility that was enormous but also empowering in its scope and significance. But the phone call also included information about Linda's continued presence at trials and her apparent struggle to process my success in the preliminary and semi-final rounds. "Your aunt has been calling family members all week," grandmother Helen revealed, but not to congratulate you or acknowledge how wrong she was about your potential. She's been suggesting that the competition this year is weaker than usual, or that you've been lucky with your lane assignments and race conditions. She seems unable to accept that you're legitimately this fast and that her predictions about your limitations were completely wrong. The knowledge that Linda remained psychologically invested in minimizing my achievements even after I had broken American records and established myself as an Olympic contender revealed the depth of her opposition to my dreams, and her inability to acknowledge being wrong about my potential. 2 hours before the session, Tyler called to provide insight into his mother's mental state and her plans for watching the final race. "Mom has been acting strange all week," he said, his voice filled with concern about Linda's psychological condition. "She's been researching the other swimmers in your final and looking for reasons why they might swim slower than expected tonight. She keeps saying that making the team would be the worst thing that could happen to you because international competition would expose your limitations." Tyler's revelation that Linda was hoping I would fail to make the Olympic team because success would lead to greater eventual disappointment showed that her opposition had reached pathological levels. She was now arguing that my achievement would be harmful rather than acknowledging that her predictions had been wrong. "Dad is really worried about her," Tyler continued. "He thinks she's going to have some kind of breakdown if you actually make the team tonight. She's invested so much in proving that you don't belong at this level that your success is threatening her sense of reality." The conversation with Tyler provided final confirmation that Linda's campaign against my dreams had never been about protecting me from disappointment. It had been about protecting herself from being proven wrong about the limitations she had assigned to my potential and the prejudices she held about small-town athletes competing at elite levels. 1 hour before the final session, I completed my final warm-up and entered the athlete-ready room where the 8 finalists waited to be called to the pool deck. The atmosphere was quiet and focused, with each swimmer mentally preparing for the race that would determine their Olympic future. I closed my eyes and visualized not just my own race execution but also the faces of everyone whose support had made this moment possible. I thought about my father's sacrifices, my grandmother's financial support, Coach Rodriguez's unwavering belief, and the entire community of Riverside that was gathering to watch my race. But I also thought about Linda somewhere in the spectator sections, watching and hoping for confirmation that her years of doubt and opposition had been justified. That motivation was different from the positive support that had sustained me through training, but it provided additional fuel for my determination to succeed despite her psychological campaign. When we were introduced to the crowd for the final, the roar of 8,000 spectators was deafening. I could see American flags scattered throughout the venue and knew that millions of people were watching the television broadcast, including everyone whose support or opposition had shaped my journey to this moment. The race itself felt like both a culmination and a beginning. I executed our race strategy perfectly, staying patient through the first 100 meters while maintaining contact with the leaders. At the 150-meter mark, I was in 4th place but gaining on the swimmers ahead of me with the controlled acceleration that Coach Rodriguez and I had practiced for months. The final 50 meters felt like a sprint and a meditation combined. I could see that I was closing the gap on the leaders, moving from 4th to 3rd to 2nd as my finishing speed proved superior to swimmers who had gone out more aggressively. With 25 meters remaining, I was challenging for the lead. I touched the wall completely exhausted and immediately looked up at the scoreboard to see my placement and time. The numbers seemed impossible at first: 2nd place with a time that was 3 seconds faster than my previous personal best and fast enough to secure my position on the Olympic team. I had achieved my Olympic dream. The emotion that overwhelmed me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Years of training, sacrifice, family conflict and personal doubt had led to this single race, and I had proven that dreams could survive opposition, that small-town athletes could compete at the highest level, and that Linda's vision of limitations was fundamentally wrong. Coach Rodriguez was crying as he embraced me after the race, his belief in my potential finally validated on the biggest stage in American swimming. "You didn't just make the team," he said through tears of joy and vindication. "You proved that heart and determination can compete with any advantages." The post-race interview area was crowded with journalists who wanted to understand how a swimmer from Riverside, Colorado had just earned a spot on the United States Olympic team. Their questions focused on my unconventional path, my support system, and my feelings about achieving what many had considered an impossible dream. But one question cut through all the others with its directness and relevance to the family conflict that had shaped my preparation. Claire, your aunt gave several interviews expressing doubt about your ability to compete at this level. How does it feel to prove those predictions wrong? My response was gracious but clear. I've learned that dreams don't have geographical boundaries or resource requirements. Sometimes people have different perspectives on what's possible, and I understand that my path to this level has been unconventional. But I'm grateful for everyone who believed in my potential and helped make this moment possible. After completing my media obligations and drug testing protocols, I finally had time to process what had just happened. I had not only made the Olympic team, but had done so with a performance that established me as a medal contender rather than just a participant grateful for the experience. My father found me in the athlete area, his joy and vindication evident in every word he spoke. "Claire, I am so proud of you I can barely speak," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You've shown that dreams aren't limited by other people's expectations or fears. You've proven that believing in yourself is more powerful than listening to doubt." But it was the phone call from Tyler 30 minutes after my race that provided the most insight into how my Olympic team selection had affected Linda's psychological state. "Claire, I had to call you immediately," he said, his voice filled with excitement and amazement. "Mom watched your race from the stands, and when you touched the wall in second place, she just sat there staring at the scoreboard like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She didn't cheer, she didn't celebrate, she just looked completely shocked." Tyler revealed that Linda's reaction to my Olympic team selection had been immediate psychological shutdown. Her Part 4. The road to gold and ultimate confrontation. The 6 weeks between making the Olympic team and departing for Paris felt like living in two different worlds simultaneously. In one world, I was an Olympic athlete preparing for the pinnacle of international competition, training harder than ever before, while managing media obligations and sponsor commitments that came with representing my country on the world's biggest stage. In the other world, I was still Claire Thompson from Riverside, Colorado, navigating family dynamics that had become even more complicated following my dramatic vindication at trial. Linda's psychological response to my Olympic team selection had created ripple effects throughout our extended family that no one had anticipated. According to multiple relatives who called to update me on the situation, she had essentially retreated from all family contact, refusing to acknowledge my achievement or participate in conversations about my upcoming Olympic competition. "She won't even say your name," my cousin Sarah reported during one of our phone conversations. "When people try to talk about your success or the Olympics, she just changes the subject, or leaves the room. It's like she's pretending none of this is happening." But Linda's retreat wasn't passive or quiet. Tyler revealed during our regular check-ins that his mother had become obsessed with researching my Olympic competitors, studying their training backgrounds and international experience to build a case for why they would defeat me decisively in Paris. "She knows everything about the swimmers in your event," Tyler told me during a particularly concerning conversation. "She can tell you their personal best times, their training locations, their coaching histories, and their previous Olympic performances. She's convinced that racing against true international competition will expose your limitations." The revelation that Linda had channeled her inability to accept my trial's success into preparation for my Olympic failure was disturbing but also illuminating. She couldn't acknowledge being wrong about my potential, so she was repositioning her predictions to focus on the next level of competition where she hoped to finally be vindicated. Coach Rodriguez helped me understand that Linda's behavior represented a pattern common among people who become psychologically invested in others' failure. "When reality contradicts their predictions, they don't adjust their perspective," he explained during one of our training sessions. "They move the goalposts and find new reasons why eventual failure is inevitable." But Linda's campaign wasn't limited to passive research and family avoidance. 3 weeks before the Olympics, I discovered that she had been contacting swimming journalists and Olympic commentators, positioning herself as a family member willing to provide background information about the pressure I was facing and the challenges that first-time Olympians encountered. The sports editor of a major swimming publication called Coach Rodriguez to verify information that someone claiming to be my aunt had provided about my mental preparation and support system. "She seemed very knowledgeable about your training background," the editor explained, "but some of her comments raised questions about whether you have adequate psychological support for competing at this level." The realization that Linda was still actively working to undermine my confidence through media manipulation, even after I had proven her wrong at trials, felt like a betrayal that transcended normal family dysfunction. She was using her family connection to access journalists and plant stories designed to create doubt about my readiness for Olympic competition. "This is beyond inappropriate," my father said when we discussed Linda's media campaign. "She's actively trying to sabotage your preparation for the biggest competition of your life. We need to consider legal action if this continues." But Coach Rodriguez advocated for a different approach that focused on using Linda's opposition as motivation rather than allowing it to become a distraction. "She's showing you exactly what you're racing against," he said. "Not just the swimmers in your event, but everyone who believes that small-town athletes don't belong on the world stage." The psychological preparation for the Olympics became as important as the physical training, with Dr. Martinez helping me develop strategies for handling the increased pressure and media attention that came with being a first-time Olympian. We worked on techniques for maintaining focus despite external noise, and for channeling doubt into determination. Your aunt's behavior is actually providing valuable preparation for the psychological challenges you'll face in Paris, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. "If you can maintain confidence despite family opposition, you'll be well equipped to handle anything that international competition throws at you." The final month of preparation included a training camp at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, where I worked alongside other team members and had access to world-class facilities and support staff. The experience was both inspiring and humbling, exposing me to a level of professionalism and technical sophistication that confirmed I belonged at this level while also revealing areas where I could continue improving. During the training camp, I received regular updates from family members about Linda's evolving mental state and her preparations for watching my Olympic competition. The reports painted a picture of someone who had become completely consumed by the need to prove that international competition would vindicate her years of predictions about my limitations. "She's been calling sports bars and restaurants in Denver to find out which ones will be showing your race," Tyler reported during one of our conversations. "She wants to watch with other people so she can explain why you're going to struggle against world-class competition." The image of Linda planning to watch my Olympic race in public venues, where she could provide commentary about my inevitable disappointment, was both sad and motivating. Her psychological investment in my failure had become so complete that my potential success represented a threat to her sense of identity and judgment. 2 weeks before departing for Paris, I made a decision that would define my approach to the Olympics and my relationship with Linda's opposition. I wrote her a letter that I intended to send, not to provoke confrontation but to clarify my perspective on our family conflict and my determination to succeed despite her predictions. "Linda," I wrote, "I know that you've spent years predicting that I would fail at every level of swimming competition. You were wrong about state championships, wrong about nationals, wrong about trials, and you'll be wrong about the Olympics. But more importantly, your doubt has taught me that dreams don't require permission from people who can't imagine achieving them themselves. I'm going to Paris not just to race for medals, but to prove that your vision of limitations is too small to contain what's possible when someone refuses to accept boundaries that others try to place on their potential. Thank you for showing me exactly what I'm swimming against." I never sent that letter, but writing it provided clarity and resolve that carried through my final preparations. Linda's years of opposition had created psychological armor that would serve me well in the pressure cooker of Olympic competition. The departure for Paris was ceremonial and emotional, with family members gathering at the airport to send off their Olympic athlete. My father, grandmother, and several relatives wore Team USA gear and carried signs expressing their pride and support, creating a celebration that felt like validation for everyone who had invested in my dreams. But Linda's absence from the send-off was notable and symbolic. According to Tyler, she had refused invitations to participate in any pre-Olympic celebrations, maintaining her position that international competition would ultimately prove her predictions correct. "She said she didn't want to be part of setting you up for a bigger fall," Tyler reported. "She's convinced that the more people build up your chances, the more painful your eventual disappointment will be." The flight to Paris provided time for reflection on the journey that had brought me to this moment, and the role that Linda's opposition had played in shaping my character and determination. Her doubt had been intended to limit my dreams, but instead, it had taught me that external criticism could only affect me if I chose to internalize it. Arriving at the Olympic Village was like entering a world where dreams became tangible realities. Being surrounded by the world's best athletes from every sport created an atmosphere of excellence and possibility that confirmed everything I had worked toward for the past decade. My event was scheduled for the 7th day of competition, giving me time to acclimate to the venue and watch other events while maintaining my training routine. The aquatic center was magnificent, with capacity for 15,000 spectators and broadcast capabilities that would bring my race to hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide. During my first training session at the Olympic pool, I felt a combination of awe and belonging that surprised me with its intensity. The facility was everything I had dreamed about, but more importantly, my preparation felt adequate for the challenge ahead. Linda's predictions about international competition exposing my limitations seemed increasingly hollow when measured against the evidence of my own readiness. 3 days before my race, I received an unexpected phone call from David, Linda's husband, that provided insight into her mental state as my Olympic competition approached.
Claire, I need to apologize for my wife's behavior and let you know how proud I am of everything you've accomplished, he said, his voice filled with regret and admiration. Linda has become completely obsessed with your race. She's been watching videos of your competitors and predicting exactly how the race will unfold. She's convinced herself that you'll be overwhelmed by the pressure and swim significantly slower than your personal best times. David's call revealed that Linda's psychological investment in my Olympic failure had reached levels that were affecting her marriage and mental health. Her inability to acknowledge my legitimate success had created a distortion of reality that was becoming increasingly difficult for those around her to tolerate. I want you to know that regardless of how you perform in Paris, you've already achieved something extraordinary, David continued. You've proven that dreams don't have geographical boundaries or resource requirements. Linda's inability to see that says more about her limitations than yours. The conversation with David provided final confirmation that Linda's opposition had never been about realistic assessment of my abilities. It had been about her own fears and prejudices about what was possible for someone from our background and community. 2 days before my race, the media attention intensified as journalists focused on the stories of first-time Olympians and their journeys to the world's biggest stage. My unconventional path from small-town Colorado to Olympic competition had attracted significant coverage, with reporters wanting to understand how someone from such a modest background had reached elite levels. During a press conference, I was asked directly about family support and whether everyone had been encouraging throughout my journey. My response was diplomatic but honest. I've been blessed with incredible support from my father, grandmother, coach, and community. Like many families, we've had different perspectives on what was possible, but that diversity of opinion has made me stronger and more determined. The question revealed that journalists were aware of Linda's public comments and media interviews expressing doubt about my readiness for international competition. Her campaign of opposition had created a narrative subplot that added complexity to my Olympic story. But rather than feeling embarrassed by the family conflict, I realized that Linda's doubt had prepared me for exactly the kind of skepticism and pressure that Olympic competition represented. Her years of questioning my abilities had taught me to find validation in performance rather than external approval. The night before my race, I received a text message from Linda that would be our final communication before the most important swim of my life. The message was brief and revealed her ongoing inability to genuinely support my success. Good luck tomorrow. I hope you're prepared for the level of competition you're about to face. The message contained no acknowledgement of how wrong her predictions had been at trials, no expression of confidence in my abilities, and no genuine encouragement for my Olympic dreams. It was a final reminder that her opposition remained unchanged despite overwhelming evidence that her doubts were baseless. But her inability to offer genuine support only strengthened my resolve to prove that her limitations didn't apply to me. The preliminary races were the next morning, and I had never been more ready to show the world that a swimmer from Riverside, Colorado belonged on the Olympic stage. Part 5, Golden Vindication and Family Transformation. The morning of my Olympic preliminary race dawned with crystalline clarity that seemed to reflect the mental focus I had achieved after years of preparation, family conflict, and personal growth. As I walked through the Olympic Village toward the Aquatic Center, I carried with me not just the technical preparation and physical conditioning that would determine my performance, but also the emotional strength that had been forged through Linda's relentless campaign of doubt and opposition. The preliminary session would determine the 16 swimmers who advanced to semifinals, which would in turn establish the 8 finalists who would compete for Olympic medals. My qualifying time ranked me 5th among entered swimmers, positioning me as a legitimate medal contender rather than someone simply grateful for the Olympic experience. Coach Rodriguez had structured my preparation to peak precisely for these 3 days of competition, with every detail of training, recovery, and mental preparation designed to optimize my performance when it mattered most. His confidence in my readiness was absolute, grounded in years of evidence and months of progressive improvement that had continued even after making the Olympic team. "You've done everything possible to prepare for this moment," he told me as we completed my final warm-up routine. "Your times don't lie. Your preparation has been thorough, and your improvement trajectory shows that you're ready to race for medals, not just Olympic experience." The warm-up session felt perfect, with my stroke mechanics precisely calibrated and my race strategy clearly defined. The pool was fast, the conditions were ideal, and my confidence was grounded in technical mastery rather than hopeful thinking. Every aspect of my preparation confirmed that I belonged at this level. As I entered the call room where swimmers waited before being summoned to the pool deck, I thought about everyone whose support had made this moment possible. My father's sacrifices, my grandmother's financial investment, Coach Rodriguez's unwavering belief, and the entire community of Riverside that would be watching my race created a foundation of support that was both empowering and humbling. But I also thought about Linda, somewhere in Denver, watching my race and hoping for confirmation that international competition would finally vindicate her years of predictions about my limitations. Her opposition had shaped my character and determination in ways that positive support alone never could have achieved. The preliminary race unfolded exactly as Coach Rodriguez and I had visualized during our preparation. I executed our strategy perfectly, qualifying second overall for semifinals with a time that established a new Olympic record and confirmed that my preparation had peaked at precisely the right moment. The performance sent shockwaves through the swimming community and media coverage, as a first-time Olympian from a small American town had just recorded the fastest preliminary time in Olympic history. Journalists immediately began comparing my swim to legendary Olympic performances, while competitors acknowledged that the race for gold had become significantly more competitive. My father's reaction in the stands was captured by television cameras and broadcast worldwide, his joy and vindication evident as he celebrated a swim that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The image of a lumber mill worker from Colorado celebrating his daughter's Olympic record became an instant symbol of dreams realized against unlikely odds. But according to Tyler, who called me immediately after the session, Linda's reaction to my Olympic record had been complete psychological shutdown. "Mom watched your race at a sports bar in Denver," he reported, his voice filled with amazement and concern. "When your time came up on the screen, she just sat there staring like she couldn't process what she was seeing." Tyler revealed that Linda had attended the viewing with several relatives who had gathered to watch my Olympic debut, apparently confident that her predictions about my limitations would finally be vindicated by international competition. Instead, she witnessed a performance that shattered every assumption she had made about my potential. "She didn't say a word for the rest of the evening," Tyler continued. "People around her were celebrating and congratulating her for having an Olympic record holder in the family, but she just looked confused and upset. It was like her entire understanding of reality had been challenged." The semi-final race 2 days later provided an opportunity to build on my preliminary performance and secure a favorable lane assignment for the final where Olympic medals would be determined. The pressure was different because expectations had changed dramatically following my Olympic record, but my confidence remained grounded in evidence rather than hope. I qualified first overall for the final with another time that lowered my own Olympic record, establishing myself as the clear favorite for gold, while also demonstrating that my preliminary performance hadn't been a fluke or fortunate circumstance. The swimming world was beginning to recognize that something extraordinary was happening. The media attention intensified exponentially as journalists struggled to understand how a swimmer from such an unconventional background had emerged as the dominant force in one of swimming's premier events. Feature articles appeared in major publications worldwide, focusing on my journey from small-town Colorado to Olympic gold medal contention. But the coverage also included references to family members who had expressed doubt about my potential, with several journalists specifically mentioning Linda's interviews predicting that international competition would expose my limitations. Her quotes were being revisited and analyzed as examples of how even family members could underestimate an athlete's potential. The night before the final, I received an unexpected visit from David, Linda's husband, who had flown to Paris to watch my race despite his wife's continued inability to acknowledge my success. "Claire, I had to come here to tell you in person how sorry I am about Linda's behavior, and how proud I am of what you've accomplished," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "She's been struggling with your success in ways that are affecting her mental health. She can't accept that her predictions were wrong, and she's become convinced that somehow your times are artificial or that the competition isn't legitimate." David's revelation that Linda was now questioning the validity of my performances, rather than acknowledging her mistakes, showed that her psychological investment in my failure had reached pathological levels. Rather than adjusting her perspective based on overwhelming evidence, she was constructing alternative explanations that preserved her original worldview. I want you to know that win or lose tomorrow, you've already proven everything you set out to prove, David continued. You've shown that dreams don't have geographical boundaries or resource limitations. You've demonstrated that small-town athletes can compete with anyone in the world. His words provided perspective and emotional grounding as I prepared for the race that would determine whether my Olympic dream would culminate in gold medal achievement. Regardless of the outcome, I had already vindicated everyone who had supported my journey and proven wrong everyone who had doubted my potential. The morning of the Olympic final brought a serenity and focus that surprised me with its intensity. Instead of overwhelming nerves, I felt prepared and excited, ready to race against the 7 fastest swimmers in the world for the Olympic title that represented the pinnacle of our sport. My final warm-up was technically perfect and emotionally satisfying, with every aspect of my preparation confirming that I was ready to perform at my absolute best when it mattered most. Coach Rodriguez's final instructions were simple and direct: race your own race, trust your preparation, and swim the race of your life. In the ready room, I closed my eyes and visualized not just my own race execution, but also everyone who would be watching my performance. I thought about my father in the stands, my grandmother watching from Colorado, the entire town of Riverside, gathered at the community center, and millions of viewers worldwide who would witness whether dreams could triumph over doubt. I also thought about Linda, somewhere in Denver, watching and hoping that this final race would provide the disappointment that would validate her years of opposition. That motivation was different from the positive support that had sustained me, but it provided additional fuel for my determination to succeed. When we were introduced to the capacity crowd of 15,000 spectators, the roar was deafening. I could see American flags throughout the venue, and knew that this race would be watched by more people than had ever observed any single moment of my life. The race itself felt like both a culmination and a transcendence. I executed our strategy flawlessly, staying patient through the first 100 meters while maintaining perfect position relative to my competitors. At the 150-meter mark, I was in second place and gaining on the leader with the controlled acceleration that Coach Rodriguez and I had perfected. The final 50 meters felt like swimming through liquid gold. I could see that I was pulling away from the field, my finishing speed proving superior to swimmers who had dominated international competition for years. With 25 meters remaining, I had established a clear lead that would not be challenged. I touched the wall knowing that I had won Olympic gold. The emotion that overwhelmed me was beyond description. Years of training, sacrifice, family conflict, and personal determination had culminated in this single swim, and I had achieved the ultimate vindication of everyone who had believed in my potential while proving wrong everyone who had doubted my dreams. Coach Rodriguez was screaming with joy as he embraced me, his belief in my potential finally validated on the world's biggest stage. "You didn't just win gold," he said, through tears of triumph and vindication. "You proved that dreams don't have boundaries, and that determination can overcome any obstacle." The victory ceremony was magical beyond imagination, standing on the top step of the Olympic podium, while my country's flag was raised and national anthem played. I thought about everyone who had made this moment possible, and everyone who had tried to prevent it, understanding that both had contributed to my ultimate success. The post-race media coverage was unprecedented, with journalists from around the world wanting to understand how a swimmer from Riverside, Colorado, had dominated an Olympic final and established herself as the world's best in her event. My story became a symbol of possibility and determination that resonated far beyond swimming. But it was Tyler's phone call after the race that provided the most revealing insight into how my Olympic gold medal had affected Linda's psychological state. "Claire, I don't know how to describe what happened when you won," he said, his voice filled with amazement and concern. "Mom was watching at the same sports bar as your preliminaries, and when you touched the wall first, she just broke down completely. She started crying and couldn't stop, but they weren't tears of joy or celebration. She looked like someone whose entire world had collapsed." Tyler revealed that Linda's reaction to my Olympic victory had been immediate and total psychological breakdown. Her years of predictions about my limitations had been so thoroughly contradicted by my performance that she seemed unable to function or process reality. She kept saying that it wasn't possible, that swimmers from small towns don't win Olympic gold medals. Tyler continued. People around her were trying to congratulate her and celebrate having an Olympic champion in the family, but she just kept crying and saying that something was wrong. The conversation revealed that Linda's opposition to my dreams had been so fundamental to her identity that my success represented a complete challenge to her understanding of what was possible. Rather than feeling joy for my achievement, she was experiencing grief for the worldview that my victory had destroyed. 2 days later, I received a letter from Linda that would mark a turning point in our family relationship and her own personal growth. The letter was handwritten and filled with emotion that revealed genuine struggle and eventual recognition of her mistakes. Claire, she wrote, I have spent the past week trying to understand how I could have been so wrong about your potential and so destructive in my opposition to your dreams. Watching you win Olympic gold has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own limitations and fears. I realize now that my doubt was never about realistic assessment of your abilities. It was about my own fear of what your success might mean about the limitations I had accepted in my own life. If someone from Riverside could achieve Olympic glory, what did that say about my own unfulfilled dreams and abandoned aspirations? I was wrong about everything. Wrong about your potential, wrong about small-town athletes, wrong about what's possible when someone refuses to accept other people's limitations. Most importantly, I was wrong to try to impose my fears on your dreams. I know that my apology cannot undo years of doubt and opposition, but I want you to know that I am genuinely proud of what you have accomplished and ashamed of my role in trying to prevent it. You have taught our entire family that dreams don't require permission, and that determination can overcome any obstacle, including family doubt. Your Olympic gold medal represents more than athletic achievement. It proves that limitations exist in people's minds rather than in reality, and that someone with enough courage and determination can exceed any expectation that others try to place on their potential. Linda's letter represented a fundamental transformation that extended beyond our family relationship to her own understanding of possibility and limitation. My Olympic victory had forced her to confront the role that fear and prejudice had played in her opposition to my dreams. 3 months after the Olympics, Linda requested a family meeting at grandmother Helen's ranch, where she publicly apologized to everyone who had supported my journey and acknowledged how wrong she had been about my potential. The apology was genuine and emotional, representing real personal growth, rather than forced contrition. I spent years trying to convince everyone that Claire's dreams were unrealistic, she said, her voice filled with regret and newfound understanding. I was afraid that supporting her would lead to disappointment, but I realize now that my opposition was really about my own fears and limitations. She continued by acknowledging the damage that her campaign had caused, and the strength that my family had shown in supporting my dreams despite her opposition. Claire's success has taught me that dreams don't have geographical boundaries or resource requirements. They only require belief, determination, and the courage to ignore people who can't imagine achieving them. The family reconciliation was meaningful and healing, but the most important outcome was Linda's personal transformation. My Olympic victory had challenged her fundamental assumptions about limitation and possibility, forcing growth that made her a better person and a more supportive family member. Today, Linda is one of my strongest supporters, using her experience to encourage other young athletes from non-traditional backgrounds to pursue their dreams despite doubt and opposition. She speaks at youth sporting events about the importance of supporting rather than limiting young people's aspirations. I learned that when someone shows you their dreams, she often tells audiences, your job is to help them achieve those dreams, not to protect them from disappointment by convincing them to aim lower. My Olympic gold medal hangs in a place of honor in grandmother Helen's ranch house, visible to every family gathering and celebration. But the real victory wasn't the medal itself. It was proving that dreams could survive doubt, that small-town athletes could compete with anyone in the world, and that family opposition could become family support when people were willing to grow and change. Linda's transformation from my harshest critic to one of my strongest supporters represents the most meaningful outcome of my Olympic journey. She learned that limitations exist in people's minds rather than in reality, and that someone with enough determination can exceed any expectation that others try to place on their potential. The girl from Riverside, Colorado, had not only won Olympic gold, but had also taught her entire family that dreams don't require permission from people who can't imagine achieving them themselves. Part 5: Golden Vindication and Life Transformation. The morning of my Olympic final dawned with the kind of perfect clarity that athletes dream about experiencing at the most important moment of their careers. As I walked through the Olympic Village toward the Aquatic Center, every step felt deliberate and purposeful, carrying me toward a confrontation that would determine not just my athletic legacy, but whether years of family doubt and personal determination would culminate in ultimate vindication. The weight of expectation was unprecedented. After breaking Olympic records in both preliminaries and semifinals, I was no longer the small-town underdog hoping to gain experience at my first Olympics. I was the world record holder and heavy favorite for gold, carrying the dreams of an entire community and the hopes of everyone who had ever been told their aspirations were too ambitious for their circumstances. Coach Rodriguez had maintained his calm professionalism throughout the week, but I could see the emotion building in his eyes as we approached the culmination of our decade-long journey together. "Claire, everything we've worked toward for 10 years comes down to the next 2 hours," he said, as we completed my pre-race routine. "You've proven you belong here, you've proven you're the fastest swimmer in the world right now, and today you get to prove that dreams don't have geographical boundaries." The warm-up pool buzzed with controlled energy as the 8 fastest swimmers in the world prepared for the race that would determine Olympic gold. My preparation felt flawless, with every aspect of my stroke mechanics and race strategy perfectly calibrated for the performance of my lifetime. The pool was fast, conditions were ideal, and my confidence was grounded in evidence rather than hope. As I completed my final preparation routine, I received a text message from grandmother Helen that provided the emotional grounding I needed for the magnitude of the moment ahead. "Claire, the entire town of Riverside has gathered at the community center to watch your race. The mayor estimates over 2,000 people are here, including folks who've driven from neighboring towns to be part of this moment. You're carrying all of our dreams with you." The message reminded me that my Olympic final represented more than personal achievement or athletic accomplishment. I was swimming for everyone who had ever been told their dreams were too big for their background, everyone who had invested in possibilities that others couldn't imagine, and everyone who believed that determination could overcome any limitation imposed by circumstances or critics. But I also knew that Linda was somewhere in Denver, likely surrounded by family members, who had gathered to watch my race, still psychologically invested in the possibility that Olympic pressure would finally validate her years of predictions about my inevitable limitations. Her opposition had shaped my character and resolve in ways that positive support alone never could have achieved. 3 hours before the session, Tyler called with an update on his mother's mental state that revealed the depth of her continued investment in my potential failure.
"Mom has been obsessing over every detail of tonight's race," he reported, his voice filled with concern about Linda's psychological condition. "She's been studying videos of your competitors and convinced herself that the pressure of being the favorite will cause you to crack under the spotlight." Tyler revealed that Linda had researched the historical performance patterns of swimmers competing in their first Olympic finals, looking for evidence that favorites often underperformed when facing the ultimate pressure of Olympic gold medal competition. Her analysis had become so detailed that she could recite statistics about choking under pressure and the psychological challenges facing first-time Olympic favorites. "She keeps saying that international finals are completely different from anything you've experienced before," Tyler continued. "She's convinced that when you're standing behind the blocks with hundreds of millions of people watching, you'll realize that you're in over your head." The knowledge that Linda remained psychologically committed to my failure even after I had broken world records and dominated every level of competition was both disturbing and motivating. Her inability to acknowledge my legitimate success had become a pathological investment in eventual disappointment that revealed more about her limitations than mine. 2 hours before my race, I sat quietly in the athlete lounge reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment and the role that opposition had played in forging my character. Linda's years of doubt had been intended to limit my dreams, but instead they had taught me that external criticism could only affect me if I chose to internalize it. Every prediction she had made about my limitations had been proven wrong through performance and achievement. She had been wrong about state championships, wrong about national competition, wrong about Olympic trials, wrong about international racing, and she would be wrong about Olympic finals. Her pattern of opposition had become a reliable indicator that I was on the right path toward achieving something extraordinary. Dr. Martinez, the sports psychologist, had prepared me for exactly this kind of pressure and expectation. Elite athletes often face their greatest psychological challenges when they transition from underdog to favorite, she had explained during our preparation sessions. "The key is remembering that your abilities haven't changed, only other people's expectations have shifted." Her guidance had taught me to separate my own assessment of readiness from external pressure and media attention. My preparation was complete, my technical execution was perfected, and my physical conditioning was optimal. Everything else was noise that couldn't affect my performance unless I allowed it to penetrate my mental focus. 1 hour before the session, I completed my final warm-up and entered the call room where the 8 Olympic finalists waited to be summoned to the pool deck. The atmosphere was quiet and intense, with each swimmer mentally preparing for the race that would determine their Olympic legacy and potentially their place in swimming history.
I closed my eyes and visualized not just my own race execution, but also everyone who would be watching my performance. I thought about my father in the stands, his pride and vindication evident after years of supporting dreams that others had questioned. I thought about grandmother Helen watching from her ranch, surrounded by the community that had invested emotionally and financially in my success. I thought about Coach Rodriguez, whose belief in my potential had never wavered despite criticism from people who couldn't imagine small-town athletes competing at elite levels. I thought about every person in Riverside who had followed my journey and seen their own possibilities expanded through my achievements. But I also thought about Linda somewhere in Denver, watching with family members and hoping that this final race would provide the vindication of her years of doubt and opposition. Her psychological investment in my failure had become so complete that my success would represent not just athletic achievement but a fundamental challenge to her worldview about limitations and possibilities. When we were called to the pool deck, the roar from 15,000 spectators was deafening. I could see American flags scattered throughout the venue and knew that hundreds of millions of people were watching the television broadcast, including everyone whose support or opposition had shaped my journey to this moment. The introduction ceremony felt surreal and perfect simultaneously. Hearing my name announced as the world record holder and Olympic favorite was validation of everything I had worked toward, but it also represented the culmination of a journey that had begun in a small community pool with a coach who saw potential that others couldn't imagine. As I stepped onto the starting platform, I felt a serenity and focus that surprised me with its intensity. Instead of overwhelming pressure, I felt prepared and excited, ready to execute the race strategy that Coach Rodriguez and I had perfected through years of preparation and months of fine-tuning. The starting commands echoed through the arena with crystalline clarity. "Swimmers, take your mark." The pause that followed felt eternal and instantaneous, containing years of preparation and dreams within its silence. When the starting signal sounded, I executed the dive that would begin the most important 2 minutes of my life. The first 100 meters unfolded exactly as Coach Rodriguez and I had visualized during countless training sessions. I stayed patient and controlled, maintaining perfect position relative to my competitors while conserving energy for the final acceleration that would determine medal placement. My stroke felt smooth and powerful, my timing was precise, and my tactical awareness was sharp. At the halfway mark, I was in second place and perfectly positioned for the race strategy we had developed. The pace was fast but manageable, and I could feel that I had significant speed in reserve for the final 100 meters where races at this level were typically decided. The third 100 meters felt like controlled aggression, with my stroke rate building gradually as I began the sustained acceleration that would carry me through the final sprint. I could see that I was gaining on the leader while maintaining distance from the swimmers behind me, executing our tactical plan with precision that came from months of rehearsal and preparation. With 50 meters remaining, I moved into the lead with a surge of speed that felt both powerful and effortless. The acceleration came from technical perfection rather than desperate effort, demonstrating that my preparation had peaked at exactly the right moment for optimal performance. The final 25 meters felt like swimming through liquid lightning. I could see that I was pulling away from the field with finishing speed that exceeded anything I had achieved in training or previous competition. My stroke count was perfect, my breathing was controlled, and my kick was devastating in its power and efficiency. I touched the wall knowing with absolute certainty that I had won Olympic gold. The scoreboard confirmed what I had felt during the final moments of the race. Not only had I won gold by the largest margin in Olympic history for this event, but I had also lowered my own world record by over a second, establishing a time that swimming experts immediately declared might never be broken. The emotion that overwhelmed me was beyond anything I had ever experienced or imagined possible. Years of training, sacrifice, family conflict, and personal determination had culminated in this single swim, and I had achieved a level of performance that exceeded every dream I had ever dared to envision. Coach Rodriguez was crying uncontrollably as he embraced me, his belief in my potential finally validated on the world's biggest stage in the most definitive way possible. "You didn't just win gold," he said through tears of joy and vindication. "You swam the greatest race in the history of this event. You proved that dreams don't have boundaries and that determination can overcome any obstacle or opposition." The pool deck celebration was chaotic and beautiful, with teammates, coaches, and officials congratulating me while photographers captured every moment of a victory that would be remembered as one of the greatest individual performances in Olympic history. The American flag that I wrapped around my shoulders felt like validation for everyone who had supported my journey and proof for everyone who had doubted my potential. My father's reaction in the stands was captured by television cameras and broadcast worldwide, his overwhelming joy and vindication evident as he celebrated a performance that exceeded our most optimistic projections. The image of a lumber mill worker from Colorado celebrating his daughter's world record and Olympic gold became an instant symbol of dreams realized against impossible odds. The post-race interviews were a blur of questions about my background, my preparation, and my feelings about achieving what many considered the greatest upset in Olympic swimming history. Journalists wanted to understand how a swimmer from Riverside, Colorado had not only won Olympic gold but had done so with a world record that established new standards for human performance. This victory belongs to everyone who believed in possibilities that others couldn't imagine, I told the assembled media. It belongs to my father who worked double shifts to support my training, my grandmother who mortgaged her ranch to fund my dreams, my coach who saw potential when others saw limitations, and my entire community that invested in aspirations that seemed too big for our circumstances. But one question cut through all the others with its directness and relevance to the family conflict that had shaped my preparation. Claire, your aunt gave numerous interviews expressing doubt about your ability to compete at this level. How does it feel to prove those predictions wrong in such a definitive way? My response was measured but clear. Dreams don't require permission from people who can't imagine achieving them. Sometimes the greatest motivation comes from proving wrong those who underestimate what's possible when someone refuses to accept limitations that others try to place on their potential. After completing my media obligations, drug testing protocols, and victory ceremony preparations, I finally had time to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. I had not only won Olympic gold but had done so with a world record that established me as the greatest swimmer in the history of my event. But it was Tyler's phone call 30 minutes after my race that provided the most insight into how my Olympic performance had affected Linda's psychological state and worldview. "Claire, I don't know how to describe what happened when you won," he said, his voice filled with amazement, concern, and something approaching awe. "Mom was watching at the same sports bar where she'd been predicting your failure all week. When you touched the wall first and the world record came up on the screen, she just completely broke down. Not tears of joy or celebration, but complete psychological collapse." Tyler revealed that Linda's reaction to my Olympic victory and world record had been immediate and total breakdown of her ability to process reality. Her years of predictions about my limitations had been so thoroughly contradicted by my performance that she seemed unable to function or understand what she had witnessed. She kept saying that it wasn't possible, that swimmers from small towns don't break world records at the Olympics, Tyler continued, his voice reflecting his own struggle to comprehend his mother's response. People around her were trying to congratulate her and celebrate having an Olympic champion in the family, but she just kept crying and repeating that something was wrong. The conversation revealed that Linda's opposition to my dreams had been so fundamental to her identity and worldview that my success represented a complete challenge to her understanding of what was possible. Rather than feeling pride or joy for my achievement, she was experiencing grief for the belief system that my victory had destroyed. "Dad had to take her home because she couldn't stop crying," Tyler continued. "She spent the rest of the night researching your race, looking for explanations or evidence that something unusual had happened. She couldn't accept that you had legitimately broken a world record and won Olympic gold." 3 days later, while I was still in Paris completing media obligations and celebrating with teammates, I received an overnight delivery that would mark the beginning of Linda's psychological transformation and our family's healing process. The package contained a handwritten letter that revealed genuine struggle, recognition, and the beginning of personal growth. "Claire," Linda had written in careful script that showed the time and thought she had invested in every word, "I have spent the past 72 hours trying to understand how I could have been so completely wrong about your potential and so destructive in my opposition to your dreams. Watching you break a world record and win Olympic gold has forced me to confront some painful truths about my own limitations, fears, and prejudices. I realize now that my doubt was never about realistic assessment of your abilities or protective concern for your well-being. It was about my own fear of what your success might reveal about the limitations I had accepted in my own life and the dreams I had abandoned without ever truly pursuing them. If someone from Riverside, Colorado could achieve Olympic glory and break world records, what did that say about my own unfulfilled aspirations and the boundaries I had accepted as permanent?
Your success challenged every excuse I had made for my own limitations and every justification I had created for settling for less than my potential. I was wrong about everything. Wrong about your abilities, wrong about small-town athletes, wrong about what's possible when someone refuses to accept other people's definitions of limitation. Most importantly, I was wrong to try to impose my fears and prejudices on your dreams. I know that my apology cannot undo years of doubt, opposition, and psychological manipulation. I know that my campaign against your dreams caused pain and created obstacles that made your journey more difficult than it needed to be. But I want you to know that I am genuinely ashamed of my behavior and genuinely proud of what you have accomplished despite my opposition. Your Olympic gold medal and world record represent more than athletic achievement. They prove that limitations exist in people's minds rather than in reality, and that someone with enough courage, determination, and support can exceed any expectation that others try to place on their potential. You have taught our entire family that dreams don't require permission and that the only boundaries that matter are the ones we accept for ourselves. You have shown that geography, resources, and other people's expectations are just obstacles to be overcome rather than limitations to be accepted. I hope that someday you can forgive me for my role in trying to prevent the very achievement that has brought so much pride and joy to our family and community. I hope that my transformation can become part of your legacy, proving that even the harshest critics can learn and grow when confronted with evidence of what's truly possible. Linda's letter represented a fundamental transformation that extended far beyond our family relationship to her own understanding of possibility, limitation, and the role that fear plays in defining what people believe they can achieve. My Olympic victory had forced her to confront the destructive nature of her opposition and the personal growth that was required to move beyond it. 2 weeks after returning home from Paris, Linda requested a family meeting at grandmother Helen's ranch where she could publicly acknowledge her mistakes and begin the process of repairing relationships that her years of opposition had damaged. The gathering included everyone who had supported my journey, creating an opportunity for healing and reconciliation that was both overdue and deeply meaningful. I spent years trying to convince everyone that Claire's dreams were unrealistic and potentially harmful, Linda said, her voice filled with genuine remorse and newfound understanding. I was afraid that supporting her aspirations would lead to disappointment and embarrassment for our entire family. But I realize now that my opposition was really about my own fears and the limitations I had accepted for myself. I convinced myself that I was protecting Claire from inevitable failure, but I was actually protecting myself from confronting what might be possible if someone had enough courage to pursue dreams that others considered impossible. Her success has forced me to examine my own abandoned aspirations and the excuses I've made for settling for less than my potential. Linda continued by acknowledging the specific damage that her campaign had caused and the strength that our family had shown in supporting my dreams despite her active opposition. Claire's success has taught me that dreams don't have geographical boundaries, resource requirements, or permission prerequisites. They only require belief, determination, and the courage to ignore people who can't imagine achieving them. I want to publicly apologize to everyone in this room who supported Claire's journey while I worked to undermine it. You showed wisdom and courage that I lacked, and you helped make possible an achievement that has brought honor to our family and inspiration to people around the world. The family reconciliation was emotional and healing, but the most important outcome was Linda's commitment to personal transformation and her determination to use her experience to help other young athletes from non-traditional backgrounds pursue their dreams despite doubt and opposition. Over the following months, Linda began speaking at youth sporting events throughout Colorado, sharing her story of transformation and encouraging young athletes to pursue their dreams regardless of skepticism from family members or community critics. Her presentations became powerful testimonials about the importance of supporting rather than limiting young people's aspirations. I learned that when someone shows you their dreams, she would tell audiences of parents and coaches, your job is to help them achieve those dreams, not to protect them from disappointment by convincing them to aim lower. The greatest disservice we can do to young people is to impose our own limitations on their potential. Her transformation from my harshest critic to one of my strongest advocates became an integral part of my Olympic legacy, demonstrating that even the most entrenched opposition could evolve into support when people were willing to confront their own fears and prejudices. 6 months after the Olympics, Linda approached me with a proposal that would formalize her commitment to supporting young athletes and make amends for her years of opposition to my dreams. She wanted to establish a foundation that would provide financial support and encouragement to athletes from small towns and modest backgrounds who were pursuing elite-level competition.
I want to do everything I can to ensure that other young athletes don't face the kind of opposition that I created for you, she explained during our conversation about the foundation. I want to help remove barriers rather than creating them, and I want to use my experience to show other family members how damaging doubt and negativity can be. The Claire Thompson Foundation, funded initially by Linda's personal contribution and ongoing fundraising efforts, began providing scholarships, training support, and encouragement to young athletes whose dreams exceeded their circumstances. Linda's involvement in recruiting donors and volunteers became a powerful demonstration of her transformed perspective and commitment to supporting rather than limiting aspirations. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was a young gymnast from rural Wyoming, whose family couldn't afford elite-level coaching and competition expenses. Linda personally mentored the girls' parents, helping them understand the importance of supporting their daughters' dreams despite financial challenges and geographic limitations. I see myself in parents who are afraid to support dreams that seem too big, Linda explained during one of our foundation meetings. I understand the fear of disappointment and the temptation to protect children by encouraging them to be realistic. But I've learned that the greatest protection we can provide is belief in their potential and support for their aspirations. Today, 3 years after my Olympic victory, Linda has become one of the most effective advocates for young athletes in our region. Her transformation from critic to champion has inspired other family members to examine their own roles in either supporting or limiting the dreams of young people in their lives. Her speaking engagements at schools and sporting events focus on the psychological damage that doubt and negativity can cause, and the transformative power of belief and support in helping young people achieve their potential. She uses her own experience as a cautionary tale about the consequences of imposing limitations on others' dreams. Claire's Olympic gold medal taught me that limitations exist in our minds rather than in reality, she often tells audiences. When we tell young people that their dreams are too big or unrealistic, we're really revealing our own fears and prejudices rather than making accurate assessments of their potential. The relationship between Linda and me has evolved into something neither of us could have imagined during the years of conflict and opposition. She has become one of my closest advisors and strongest supporters, bringing to our collaboration the same intensity and determination that she once directed toward opposing my dreams. Her transformation represents the most meaningful outcome of my Olympic journey, proving that even the most entrenched opposition can evolve into passionate support when people are willing to confront their own limitations and grow beyond them. She learned that dreams don't require permission from people who can't imagine achieving them, and she dedicated herself to ensuring that other young athletes receive the support that she had failed to provide. My Olympic gold medal hangs in a place of honor in Grandmother Helen's ranch house, visible during every family gathering and celebration. But the real victory wasn't the medal itself or the world record that accompanied it. The true triumph was proving that dreams could survive opposition, that small-town athletes could compete with anyone in the world, and that family conflict could transform into family support when people were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to personal growth. Linda's journey from my harshest critic to one of my strongest supporters demonstrates that it's never too late to recognize limitations in our own thinking and work to overcome them. Her transformation has touched hundreds of young athletes and their families, creating a legacy of support and encouragement that extends far beyond our own family's healing. The girl from Riverside, Colorado had not only won Olympic gold and broken world records, but had also taught her entire family and community that dreams don't have geographical boundaries, resource requirements, or permission prerequisites. They only require belief, determination, and the courage to ignore people who can't imagine achieving them themselves. Today, when young athletes face doubt from family members or community critics, Linda's story serves as proof that opposition can transform into support, that mistakes can lead to growth, and that the harshest critics can become the strongest advocates when confronted with evidence of what's truly possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.